Yeah. Evgeny, is it Friday in Russia as well, or did the communists cancel Friday?
I think that we maintain, communist tradition, so it is Friday.
Okay, then it's good. Then it's good.
We were clever enough not to transfer to capitalist traditions,
Yeah.
Karthik, all the speakers of the session are available. Karthik?
Hello?
Pardon?
No. I am talking to my office. Karthik? Karthik?
Sir, give me 2 minutes. I'm just checking.
Let me also see. Rachel, Tiane, Anna Belkin is there. Sachin, yeah, I think they are there. We can start.
Only Rangareddy has to come.
Okay, let him
So everybody is here.
So, yeah.
Okay. I think you need to give me admin rights so that I can.
Yeah, thank you. So, welcome to the third day of the first session of the third day. This session will be chaired by Professor Gilvan Oliveira from Brazil. So now the floor is to you, sir. I do not want to take much time. Gilvan, the floor is for you now.
Okay. So good evening, everybody. Good morning for us in the American continent. It's a pleasure to be with you in the axis number 5, access of information access. Today we are going to discuss the omnipresent specter of disinformation and legislation against disinformation in various countries, serious problems touching the question of migrants and how migrants can have access to information, considering that we have more than 270 million international migrants in the world. Questions related to open science movement and how a quick publication can lead to mistrust to science, and of course, the potential of social media to respond to the crisis. I would like to invite our 4 speakers and reinforce that we have 15 minutes. I ask you to keep the time. We have 15 minutes to present the PowerPoints. Then you can pay attention on the questions on the chat. And we are going to have 5 minutes in the end to discuss the questions that we find on the chat. So I would like to invite our first speaker, Dr. Anna Belkin from Russia, that will take the topic, the dangers of shutting out voices in the time of COVID-19. Dr. Belkin.
Thank you. And I believe I need to be able to share the screen. Okay. There. Okay. So thank you for welcoming me here today. Great. In a time of crisis, such as today's pandemic, free access to quality information is paramount. On the outset of the COVID-19 epidemic, we saw how restrictions of information, for example, flowing out of China, hindered the international response to this growing threat and likely exacerbated the very spread of the virus itself. But then, as the information flow improved, we also saw how open international exchange of information and ideas between scientists and health organizations facilitated a new age of international cooperation in combating this disease. Given the clear positive benefits of information exchange, it's alarming to see a select group of actors, particularly this triumvirate of governments, media conglomerates, and digital monopolies, coming from a highly limited geographical and political standpoint, restricting access to information unilaterally and, most importantly, internationally. They are actually, ironically, the exact same actors who pretend, or at least proclaim themselves, to be for information freedoms and for more informational openness. Yet each makes concerted efforts to restrict information flow, and they do so increasingly guided by political rationale instead of facts. The end result is a highly concentrated group of entities assuming the self-appointed role of arbiters of truth and dictating what is true and what is not to the entire world, essentially telling the world about the world itself through a single viewpoint, which is a decidedly narrow lens. Now, we at RT have had firsthand experience with what happens when these actors run rife. And for years, we've actually seen the governments, Western governments in particular, Western media, lean into the discrimination of Russian news media at large under the guise of tackling the so-called Russian disinformation. But in reality, the moves were guided not, again, as I said, by pursuit of facts or founded on facts, but in pure geopolitics. This isn't a new phenomenon, but recent months have permitted a snowball effect to take place courtesy of the pandemic. And what I'd like to do today is to go over these main three pillars of information control one by one. Okay. So we start with the government actors. They're the ones that often originate actual restrictions and impose them upon media organizations like ours. For example, just this year, essentially a couple of months ago, RT has come up against this tactic firsthand. In Latvia and Lithuania in particular, RT's license was revoked based on an entirely baseless claim that our organization was and is under the control of Mr. Dmitry Kislov, who is a Russian media executive who is currently under European Union sanctions. But in reality, Mr. Kislov does not have and has never had any role at RT whatsoever. And that fact is widely known within Russia and outside of Russia, and it can also be easily established. So nevertheless, the governments in question ignored this overwhelming evidence. And this was even noted in British and in American press, making it clear that these governments were acting entirely on the false pretense just to ban an undesirable news media outlet like ours. Similarly, a few months ago, the leader of Britain's opposition party, Sir Keir Starmer, called on the UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson to review RT's broadcasting license in the UK in light of a government report about the interference in the British affairs, namely the Scottish referendum and the Brexit vote. Except that the report itself didn't actually show any at all RT interference in neither Brexit vote nor Scottish referendum, and the report right there and there admitted as such. And the UK license is granted by an independent regulator that is supposed to be entirely free and independent from political interference and political pressure. So we're seeing these foundational principles undermined for the benefit of excluding, when it's desired to exclude a voice like ours. Now, media conglomerates can provide cover for these kinds of restrictive government actions, further restricting availability and access to information. One of the more insidious tactics is the promotion of false media narratives. And in recent years, this took form of, I'm sure you've seen it all over the place, this fake news scaremongering in order to drive out alternative voices from the global news media landscape. Now, fake news is something that exists. It is something that is a very real threat, and we welcome any and all genuine attempts to prevent its spread. However, the fight against fake news in the way that we have seen it has been hijacked largely as a tool to silence alternative viewpoints and to limit information. The term is also often misappropriated to target genuine news outlets and journalists who step outside of the status quo. So while the entire world is combating this real epidemic, this real crisis, we are seeing the mainstream media obsessed with chasing the phantom one of the supposed Russian disinformation in the most disingenuous way. For example, as you see on the screen, you had British paper, the Daily Express, literally accuse Russia and Russian media of murder of Brits and objected to vital factual reporting on social behavior, writing that a recent report from Kremlin-backed Russia Today showed Britons ignoring the shutdown while visiting the Spanish seaside resort of Benidorm. Now, of course, there was never any dispute over the authenticity of the images or of the events that are portrayed in those images. Nevertheless, write it up as fake news, accuse Russians of plotting murder, and so forth. Another UK paper, The Independent, promoted this kind of paranoia too, saying that Russia was looking to destabilize the West with coronavirus disinformation, and RT has pushed apocalyptic stories in which it reported that health systems elsewhere would be unable to cope and people would be left to die. This was supposedly, according to The Independent, this was fake news, even though this report came out just a couple of days after the report in a fellow British newspaper, The Guardian, that literally said coronavirus may force UK doctors to decide who they'll save, and a lack of resources could mean that younger, healthier patients are prioritized while others are left to die. So we're talking about identical facts. We're talking about even using identical language, but only one outlet is started as fake news for no reason other than where it is coming from. And time again, unfortunately, we see these kinds of examples where the claims of fake news are blatantly weaponized and are essentially fake themselves, because the mainstream media will support any kind of suppression of information in pursuit of today's bête noire, which often is Russian media. This double standard, like many other things, has been particularly apparent during the coronavirus pandemic. Here on the screen, you see just a collection of headlines. One of the biggest false narratives perpetuated by the mainstream media outlets about the coronavirus pandemic has been that Russian media has been downplaying the seriousness of the pandemic by comparing it to flu. Yet for many months, and here you're seeing, you're seeing the headlines from everything from the Washington Post to Science to, I think there's Daily Beast to the Associated Press, writing themselves saying that coronavirus is flu-like. Of course, when later on information changed, none of them have been labeled as fake news or held to account for spreading this kind of information, and instead the narrative shift to just blame it all on Russia. So of course, maximum care should always be taken by media with all information, but particularly where public health is concerned. And of course, nobody is immune from individual cases of misinformation or just even old-fashioned erroneous reporting, particularly during the times of information scarcity, like a phenomenal, not atypical in the face of any new, barely understood threat, like a novel pandemic. We had the World Health Organization itself revise its guidelines on mask wearing, for example, several times. We had a UK study from the Imperial College that projected COVID deaths in the US of around 2 million. That was later on massively revised. But, in both of these instances, those are just a couple of examples, hundreds of conflicting articles were circulated, and that's something that we all media organizations had to work with. And then when new information comes to light, update it accordingly. But for some outlets, for the right outlets, it was possible for them to wipe their slate clean while crying fake news about others, of whom it is essentially safe and politically expedient to do so, like Russian media, as a deflection. Now, the inconvenient truths regarding the source of bad information are easy to overlook when you can blame the bête noire outside of the acceptable mainstream narrative. And unfortunately, we live in an era where any reporting coming out of Russia can be painted with a broad brush of Russian disinformation that scores PR points. For example, here you have a couple of stories from earlier this year from the New York Times and Financial Times, both pushing stories stating that Russia was concealing its real COVID death toll, even though there was no evidence to support that claim. The skepticism of Russia's numbers, even though they weren't being disputed by the World Health Organization itself, is part of the dominant Western narrative about Russia, that essentially Russians cannot possibly do anything right, and God forbid, definitely cannot do anything better than others. The articles didn't explore about, the reasons why there might be such a performance, perhaps grounded in country's demographics, or how the families live and congregate within Russia, the legacy healthcare system, our vast historical experiences with respiratory illnesses, etc. And within the story itself, they undermined their own thesis, the New York Times did in particular, noting that, and you can see that on the chart on the right, that underreporting of fatalities has been observed in many other countries where subsequent data reveal large upticks in deaths compared to the same periods in previous years. This was a quote. And then it's showing the charts from Spain and from England display a change in historical mortality trend lines nearly identical to Russia's. Instead, what was happening in Russia was blamed on the favorite trope, the malevolent Russian propaganda. And the disparity that the New York Times supposedly found, quote, they said, quote, contrasts sharply with the line peddled by the Kremlin. The New York Times obviously didn't clarify whether the same historical disparities in Spain and the UK contrasted sharply with the lines peddled by Madrid and Downing Street, or why these governments didn't stand accused of concealment or propaganda. So the media establishment, unfortunately, has a long history of this kind of crafting of highly based narratives about the good versus the bad actors via selective context and fact manipulation, eventually enabling discriminatory restrictive actions by their governments, which I already talked about, and also by the digital giants, which is the last entity that I'll talk about next. The best way to compound the government's and media conglomerates' effectiveness in limiting access to information is for them to lean on the most practical tool for wholly shutting out of inconvenient voices, and that is digital monopolies, which are the informational behemoths of our cultural and economic era. Social media companies are increasingly evolving also as politicized platforms. I think we've seen many, many examples of that over the last few years. And most recently, we have seen this materialize on Twitter, where discriminatory labeling and adaptation of its algorithms now limits the visibility of anything that doesn't agree with the Western establishment worldview. Publicly funded news media outlets from the wrong parts of the world are now being excluded from Twitter's recommendation system, limiting their reach.
Dr. Belkin, you have 2 minutes.
Okay. Removing post prominence and search visibility. Unsurprisingly, under this new system, RT and China's Xinhua are labeled the state media, but curiously, Voice of America, BBC, NPR, even Al Jazeera are not. So this policy, unfairly applied, throttles alternative voices, many of which are non-Western, and actively promotes the Western narratives that serve their establishments. Obviously, the Twitter is not alone here. Facebook and Google are guilty of this too, and they're censoring domestic content in all corners of the world. For example, a couple of months ago, a video of the Russian president addressing the Russian people on the policies related to the fight against COVID-19 in Russian on a major domestic Russian language only news platform was taken down by YouTube, even though not a single example of fake news or disinformation was attributed to this speech, neither by YouTube itself, not even the mainstream press, which scrutinizes every Putin's word. Now, so why is this obsession with the fake news labeling and shutting out of legitimate voices? Because it's essentially impossible to combat real fakes, which often stem from rumors, either spread by misinformed persons, not acting out of malice, but out of panic. They come from rogue actors, such as those, we've read stories of Macedonian teenagers capitalizing clickbait. They come from blustering politicians, but the problem is you cannot legislate against a rumor, you cannot censor a US president, or you cannot easily identify small rogue operations in far off corners of the world. Nevertheless—
Dr. Belkin, I ask you to come to the conclusions.
Okay, yes. So as a result, there is a knee-jerk reaction to find the scapegoats, and instead of promoting informational media diversity, to punish some kind of any actor in order to generate good PR and to show that you are doing something to address fake news. So what can we do? My 3 recommendations here are: number 1, establish universal standards, where we demand that restrictive action against information sources is only taken against specific demonstrably false information itself. to seek transparency and accountability for restrictive actions by governments and digital platforms, to make sure that there's public scrutiny for actions that limit information accessibility. And we need to make sure that there are equal standards for all, not biased application imposed on the few. And we need to demand open dialogue, preventing actions that counter free access to information in a unilateral manner. And we need for this to have an international entity to appeal to if digital platforms or other actors are acting transnationally, particularly if they intend to continue labeling and limiting the voices of world leaders and legitimate sources of information. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Anna Belkin. I will not comment now the presentations so that we can save time, and I give the floor directly to our second speaker, Dr. Sridhar Achiriolu from India, that will bring a contribution on governance issues during COVID-19. Information deficit aggravates migrant crisis in India. Dr. Sridhar.
Thank you very much, Harrison. Mr. Gilwan, a very good morning to his American friends and very good evening to other friends. Good afternoon also for those. It is good afternoon. It is my great pleasure to be associated with this wonderful international seminar. My subject has already talked about by the chairperson. So am I visible? Is my screen is shared? Yeah, that's very good. Now, I would like to talk about the crisis of governance in India because of lack of information. The lack of information in this country has been very fatal on various means. You know, if there is a coronavirus infection, you have an intensive care unit. But what happens if system itself is infected because of lack of access to information? What is the intensive care unit for the system? This is the question that we are asking in this country. Now, we have really a good regime of transparency, but it came to a standstill with COVID-19 lockdown. Regulation came from authorities, but it was strengthening the secrecy regime and not transparency anymore. I'd like to say that if you don't have access to information, it is difficult to have health. And if you don't have access to redressal of grievance systems, you can't solve your problems and the relief will be far away. And if you don't have access to justice system, it is difficult to get justice when your human rights are violated. This is the situation in this country. That was the problem everybody was facing during the lockdown caused by COVID. Now, we have a robust system of transparency under Right to Information Act, but it was a kind of information lockdown with 28 state information commissions were on vacation. I mean, not exactly the vacation, it's a COVID vacation. And they shut down the doors. Only Central Information Commission was working only on WhatsApp communication. They were connecting through WhatsApp. That's a good idea. There was a skeleton support from the staff and they were attending to some second appeals. When they were really accessible, at least in a limited way, one organization called Commonwealth Human Rights Initiative, it wanted to know what kind of information is he an application with the concerned authorities. They refused to give information, and then he has to approach the Central Information Commission in second appeal. And very interestingly, the information sought is supposed to be given within 48 hours if it is concerning life and liberty, but they refused, and then they have to go to the second appeal and they have to talk to the independent commission where the second appeal is heard. I will come to that. But before that, is another very big, humongous human rights issue. Millions of migrant labor. Very fact that there is existence of millions of migrant labor indicates the poverty, lack of employment, and need to go from one place to the other, holding for livelihood. This was a situation, and nobody knows how many people are working, how many people are there in this country. And government, without preparing anyway, with giving only 4 hours of time. It announced lockdown on March 23rd, and because of this, March 23rd, when the announcement was made by the Prime Minister, they are supposed to settle, and they are supposed to problems within 4 hours, because at the midnight nobody assessed the existence of migrant labor and the facilities available to them and are not available to them. Nobody bothered. Now, because of lockdown, they don't have food because there is no work. Because of lockdown, there is no way that they can move to their own villages because transport is closed. What is it they have to go? According to World Economic Forum, 139 million migrants are there in India, and international labor organizations also predicted that because of pandemic and lockdown, there are 400 million workers poverty-stricken, and they don't have any means of livelihood. This is the humongous human problem. And then in the absence of, they can't live in the migrated place, they cannot move because of transport lockdown, then they started walking. Can you imagine? They started walking for 1,000 miles, more than 1,000 miles, hundreds of miles of distance they did not care. They came onto the roads. Some people were cycling, some people were walking, some people were trying to sit on a wheeled suitcase, and some kind of transport, some kind of wheels they tried to obtain, and they started walking. And how long they can walk? Where is the food for them to walk? This is one scenery of walking. No, they were all walking. The youth, you look at the youth, they were walking. Then the children, the entire family, entire luggage is carried on their head, and they're walking in the rain. And this fantastic idea, it looks so poetic, but they don't have a ration card. Migrant labor
Dr. Sridhar?
Yeah, I think I'm got connected back. Am I back? Am I visible now? Audible?
Yeah.
I hope I'm audible.
Yes.
Yeah, there was some disturbance in my network. Okay. Then there was a criticism, and they came up with an idea of distributing ration free of cost during the lockdown. That's a very good measure, but the problem is they don't have a ration card, number one. Number two, unless you show Aadhaar card, they will not get a ration. So how do you expect a migrant labor walking from here and there? He's on the way, and he cannot have any access to any documents. So he could not produce, and they could not get the food. This is the plight. Then another, are you seeing this one?
Oh, I'm not seeing your PowerPoint.
Okay, I'm trying to put it. Now, okay, I think I will be sharing it again, because there was a disconnection, I could miss it. I hope it is visible now.
Yes.
Yeah, this is how the people were walking, and this is the track, where 16 people died because they were sleeping on the track. When Shramik trains were announced by the government to take them to other distant places, they tried to get into that, but because of some technical reasons or lack of money to purchase the ticket, they were not given the opportunity to board the train. Then they started walking on the track, and at one point of time they took rest, and then the train came and the tragedy occurred. So there are around 300 people died, in all, due to various reasons: starvation, suicide, exhaustion, road and rail accidents, police brutality, and denial of medical care, and infection of diseases, all that. And police brutality is exemplified here. This is an example where the police was torturing them for crossing the border, for violating the social distancing norms, and for violating the directions under disaster management Act, the orders issued by the Authorities and Disaster Management Act. They were beaten up. 130 workers were beaten up in one of the states. And, this is the very interesting incident. One girl of 16 years, she carried her father all the way 1,200 miles. Can you imagine? 1,200 miles. She traveled all on the cycle. Then unfortunately, or fortunately, I don't know what to say, 77% of migrant labor, they reached their homes, but they started walking back because there was no food available in their own native village. There is no work, there is no food. They started returning. This is another problem. Then Supreme Court was hearing some cases by video conferencing. The high courts were also hearing cases by video conferencing, but all other courts were shut down. There is no access available to the access available. They could not reach because of lack of availability of courts. Courts were not functional. That is the problem. And some of the courts opened up the internet. Via internet, they were listening to arguments, but that was also not available to these fellows. When they could gain public interest litigation, they approached. The court said, no, nothing doing, you don't have any problem. They refused. Then all senior advocates of India, 100 or more than 100 advocates, said, please take it up. This is a very serious problem. Then Supreme Court took up. And you know what was the order of the Supreme Court? The police were prosecuting the hundreds of migrant labor because they defied the orders issued by authority during the pandemic. And Supreme Court directed them, no, don't prosecute them. Even if you physically, you can prove that they have transgressed, they were helpless. Please allow them to reach their homes. That was the advice given by the Supreme Court. So what I mean to say is, even the justice was very difficult to be accessed, even when you could gain access with the Supreme Court. This is another problem. Then, whether the district's authorities or state authorities are informing the people that here is where treatment is available. That was the question. So one RTA was filed with the Chief Labor Commissioner, who is supposed to inform the labor where is that they can get treatment. Then he issued orders to all the state labor commissioners, and they advised the RTA applicant to search their websites. Information is available. And it was searched by this gentleman. What happened is none of the information is complete. The chief labor commissioners, the information was not total comprehensive and very difficult to access to any information. Every state was, some states gave information, but they did not give the contact numbers. Some states gave contact numbers, but they were not working. So the whole information system was failing because of negligence, because of irresponsible behavior, and because of various other means, including the governance issues. So in my understanding, when I saw the information regime that was working and governance that was working, I found it is very difficult to get any information from the government, even during the COVID times. Normal times, of course, you have an attitude of denying the information, but even during the COVID time, they were not even giving health information. They were not even giving the contact information where they are to go for treatment. And this was the difficulty with so which hospital is ready? Which hospital have beds? These are the ordinary questions they could not answer. Then he surveyed the 21 state government websites, and 23 out of 36 jurisdictions they searched, union territories also he searched, and then he made a survey and found that information is incomplete. These are the details. Delhi gave wrong half information. Rajasthan, incomplete. Maharashtra, there are no addresses. Punjab, no details. UP, no contact information. Uttarakhand, no names. Jammu and Kashmir, no list of hospitals at all. MP and Chhattisgarh, no updates. Bihar, no list of the hospitals. Jharkhand, no details. Odisha, no contacts. West Bengal, no contacts. Assam, missing information. Tripura, Nagaland, Karnataka, deficit information is the cause of the deaths in most of the cases. This is the problem in this country. They don't give information. According to Right to Information Act, if you are a public authority, you must give information on your own. And if you don't give information—
Dr. Sridhar, you have 2 minutes.
Yeah, thank you. I'll be concluding. So people's right to information means right to health. Right to health means right to life. And similarly, right to information means right to justice, right to good governance. And when you deny the information, all of your rights are in jeopardy. So lockdown has effectively prevented citizens from filing RTA applications. They turned away the COVID patients because they could not find out where exactly they are supposed to go because there was no information. And then doctors, this person is a doctor. He criticized that he did not get sufficient number of safety kits. For that, he was arrested, he was beaten, he was sent to jail on some false accusation. So human rights issues also over there. The access to justice I already talked about, and these are the human issues. There is public health crisis, there is information crisis, there is governance crisis. So what I suggest is, unless you establish public distribution mechanism, it is not possible to tackle the crisis of this kind. Unless you have a better transparent mechanism, and remove all kinds of secrecy regimes, it is not possible for having any kind of relief during the crisis period. And you should have appropriate data collected at least within 1 or 2 months, and that was not done. And COVID treatment information was also not available. The governments and RTA have missed a very good opportunity to learn lessons from COVID. So we should learn lessons from COVID, and we should tell this to the governments so that they adopt better information systems to help the people to live, to face the crisis of health. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Sridhar. If you add to this problem of migrants, in the case of international migrants, the problems of the different languages that migrants speak, and the fact that they don't have access to care systems normally, so we have a huge challenge to surpass. So I give the floor now to Tayane de Oliveira from Brazil, discussing open science and disinformation in times of epistemic disbelief, the challenges for a democratization of knowledge. Tayane.
Are you hearing me?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes,
thank you
well.
so much, Professor Jovan. It's an honor to be here in this important conference. What I am going to talk today is about open science and disinformation, not only in times of health crisis, but also in times of epistemic disbelief. So in this moment of health crisis is highlighted two urgent deficiencies to be debated into the science ecosystem. The first one, we talked about at the first day, the Anglophone bias of scientific research, and also the problem related to the closed system of science, in which there is a oligopoly of scientific publishers, which dominated the scientific publishing ecosystem. In this time of health crisis, the scientists has been asked to quickly publish not only the results of their research, but also the data in different kinds of repositories, preprint repositories, data repositories. I bring here two statements for two different organizations in which they point out that the acceleration of the publication of the science research is really important, not only to combat the disease, but to also to debunk disinformation. So this kind of accelerate movement is part of the open science comprehension. Open science, it's considered an umbrella term in which there is a lot of elements into this umbrella related to access, data, reproducibility, research, evaluations, policies, tools, and so on. Is it possible to find two main approaches related to open science? One of them, which is more intensified in this period of health crisis, is about the productivism, in which values as acceleration, cooperation, visibility, reproducibility, and the transparencies are common in this argument pro open science. And also we have the second approach, more related to democratization of knowledge, participation, access, and social justice. But although open science is really important at this moment of health crisis, there is a lot of challenges to make it work. One of the challenges is the commercial issue. As I said before, there is a oligopoly of scientific public system, and they perceive that open science could be a profitable investment. So they started to offer products and services to attend the demand of the open science in a movement that we are calling as open washing, like a greenwashing, like a diversity washing. They appropriate the social movement to sell things, not necessarily selling, not necessarily commercializing a product or a service, but taking our data to compose huge infrastructures. And in a moment that we are living a data-fied society, data is the new oil. So it's really profitable in a different kind, in different sense. The second challenge we have is the problem related to intellectual property protection. We don't have rules or international regulation about it. So we put our data into this repository, but we don't know how it could be used by other people. And the problem about the acceleration. For example, as I said before, scientists have been asking to publish the researches in a fast way in preprint repositories. 25% of all scientific outputs about COVID is deposited in preprints repositories, waiting for being evaluated. But the journalists use these preprints to produce sensationalist articles as a clickbait to capture the attention of these their public, because we know how this metrics works in digital environment. Mediatization, the scientific controversies, which is inherent in the own dynamics of of science. The science advanced through controversies, but when it is mediatized, increase the feeling of the disbelief of the population about science. But it's not only a problem about media and mediatization of controversies. This movement, this phenomenon of disbelief in science is part of a movement of epistemic crisis that we are facing now. What is epistemic crisis? There is institutions which produce or disseminate the knowledge and the information, the epistemic institutions which are facing some crisis at this moment. And there is a national political project to provoke this, to intensify this moment of epistemic crisis. For example, I bring some news in Brazil. Our government works in that way, attacking these epistemic institutions, attacking science, attacking media, because it's a way to diminish the collective mobilization. For example, I bring here a research that I did to understand the sharing of the hashtag about hydroxychloroquine, and it was possible to identify different discourses coming from the public. One is a way to use the medication as a political pressure to liberate the medication. Another one to support the politicians, and another one to share the conspiracy theories, sometimes coming from our own political leaderships against China, against Russia, against pharmaceutical industry, against media, and also using the own scientists to reaffirm bias against and pro-chloroquine. So when we are talking about disinformation, we are talking about disputes on narratives. It's not possible to define disinformation through typologies, through formats, or even through intentionality. For example, European Commission defined disinformation as a verifiable, false or misleading information that is created to intentionally deceive the public or may cause harm. But this intentionality is a problem, because how do we know that this disinformation was intentionally produced to deceive or cause harm? Who will be the people who will judge the intentionality of the actors in producing or sharing information? We are facing at this moment a war agenda to combat, to fight against disinformation, and it's a threat for our democracy. So we as scientists have to pay attention about this agenda and not reproduce it in general ways. But the question, the issue related to disinformation, it's not related only to the intentionality, but it's also a way to reaffirm the authority of these epistemic institutions. It's a way that attribute, that associated disinformation to the exogenous factors, external, foreign, anti-democratic, anti-institutional forces which attacks the legitimated institutions. But it's really interesting to see what the people say about these institutions. For example, I have been immersed in different WhatsApp groups of conspiracy theorists since 2018. And being in this group, it's really interesting to understand how these people perceive our own behavior. For example, they reflect this belief about these institutions, these epistemic institutions, because they perceive conflict of interests, especially concerning to pharmaceutical industries, geopolitical and political disputes related to science, especially when there is a mediatization of controversies or politicization of science. So when they do not believe in these institutions, they begin to believe only in themselves, only in their individuals' beliefs, and those who confirm them. And we know how the politicians observe this behavior and use it to convince their electors. Also, the conspiracy theorists produce alternative narratives due to their frustration of science do not able to answer about the diseases and how it spreads around the world. But the most important thing that the conspiracy theorists can bring us to understand this moment of epistemic disbelief is that they feel impotence. They feel that they are not part of these institutions. They are not part of the universities, the science institutions. So it's really important to us to think about it and to think about how these institutions consolidated themselves as a privileged spaces. Returning to the issue about the disinformation and how to tackle disinformation, there is three main ways to face disinformation. One of them is through fact-checking, another based on deliberative theories, and another one related to media and information literacies. I will talk about each one briefly. The fact-checking tools using artificial intelligence, it's the most acclaimed strategy to tackle disinformation, but we have a lot of problem with that, especially because users don't trust in this type of tools. Even when the information is correct, the disinformation is more spreadable than the correction. It's also increased the probability of the population no longer believing true titles. And the most important thing is the people just use these tools when confirm their previous attitudes, when confirm their beliefs, and avoid these tools when they contradict their belief system. The deliberative theories is the belief that people have the consciousness to choose what is good, what is true, but we live in a data-fied society, immersed and dependence in the platform, digital platforms. We are mediated by algorithms which segment our preference based on market logics, forming information bubbles and echo chambers and polarization our opinion. So we don't have this totally freedom to choose because we live in a system.
Dr. Tajani, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you so much. Media information literacy. We talked about media information literacy yesterday, but the main point is people consciousness share the information because they believe that this information meets to their opinion. So it's necessary to combine efforts of media literacies and incorporate it to new modalities. Final consideration, just to bring more research, multidisciplinary research, it's not a lack of education or lack of information, since people consciously choose to share the disinformation. The communicators should consider pairing scientific evidence with stories that speak and stimulate reflection on public beliefs and values. My recommendation, I bring a research made in Brazil, which shows that 83% of Brazilian populations would like to be heard in the discussion about science and technology. So even though it's really important to invest in access, acceleration, transparency, and replicability, we needed to understand that population wants to be heard, wants to feel part of the research centers of these epistemic institutions. So it's necessary to invest in open science models that emphasize more the democratization of the knowledge and social justice, especially in these times when our democracy is threatened. My recommendation is to invest in transdisciplinary and multifaceted task force to face this moment of disinfodemia, and also develop information technologies combining different efforts, combining artificial intelligence to identify and refute disinformation, media information literacy, combined with science education and citizen science, using different formats to make the citizen reflect on their belief system, to be aware and participate in the process of doing science. So I think that's a way for the people to learn how to identify disinformation and face this moment of disputes of narrative related to science. And that's my content. Thank you so much, Professor Gilvan.
Thank you, Tayan. Very interesting. I think we are going to have many topics to discuss. And I reinforce to our public, now 66 persons with us, to make the questions in the chat or comments so that the speakers can comment on the end. We have now our fourth speaker, Dr. Buri Ranga Reddy from India, that will contribute on access to information in the times of crisis, perspectives from COVID-19 management. I give you the floor, Dr. Buri Ranga Reddy.
Thank you, Dr. Gilvan. Let me try and share my presentation. Is it visible? Is it visible?
Yes.
Visible.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Thank you, organizers, for a fantastic program you have put for 3 days. Without losing much time, since we have very brief period given, let me straight hit into the point. Ladies and gentlemen, very good evening, good morning, good afternoon to all of you who are joining today from all over the world. Today, I would be talking about the access to information in times of crisis, the public health perspectives from COVID-19 management. All the three speakers who have spoken before me, they have set really the ground very well. And most of the points, which I am going to cover during my presentation, the theoretical basis is already given. So probably I would quickly run you through some of the aspects which are directly related to on-ground reality, what we have faced during COVID-19, and also some correlation with the theoretical perspectives in information access today. As we all know that, we are at midst of a worst crisis ever we have seen from the public health perspective. And probably, this is first ever, which is in our lifetime, barring, H1N1, SARS and MERS and Ebola, which have impacted probably not all continents and all parts of the world, only probably, a few continents where it was, having its impact. But when it comes to COVID-19, probably, the world has gone into a complete lockdown. This is something unprecedented, which we have never seen in the world. During these times, the social media platforms have proliferated, and they have in one way have revolutionized the way we communicate, the way we exchange the information, the way we access the information. The rapidity of health emergencies, especially in last 5 decades, had been very frequent, and also their severity is increasing. I probably would not go into that detail because it will take a long time in order to show actually the evolution of pandemics in last century or 2 or 3. But you have to believe me on words that last 5 decades we had been seeing much more frequent pandemics than what we have seen a century back. And their rapidity is very fast, and also the kind of impact they have on a global scale is increasing. So what is happening is that the global national authorities, including World Health Organization, are unable to respond very fast in terms of giving the right information at right time in order to effectively deal with these situations. But one silver line is that during this current pandemic, which is still ongoing, that is COVID-19, some of the countries could harness the new technologies in order to provide the information, exchange the data, and also arrive at some of the decisions. One such example I can give from India is that we have an app which is being developed by government of India called as Arogya Setu. It is a program which gives you all the information in relation to the COVID-19, and also it gives the geolocation of the patient in real-time basis, so that you can track and trace all the patients who are impacted with that particular disease, so that that can be used in order to isolate those patients and reduce the infection. Social media undoubtedly has had proven that it has unlimited possibilities of connection with stakeholders in order to spread public health emergency messages. But of course, it has got its own downside, which I will go into a little detail a little later. Like Dr. Oliveira has talked about, Dr. Anna has talked about the disinformation. They have talked about the word I liked, from Dr. Oliveira, she talked about disinfodemia, right, which is happening. All that is, of course, complicating the matter. And on the other side, the politics, economics, and the health, all of them, they are getting into one cauldron, which is making the whole, dealing with the pandemic very, very complicated. And you don't know on which side you are. Either you are on the side of the health or you are side of the government or the public institutions. Each has their own perspective, and most of the times they are conflicting, and they are not in convergence, which makes very complicated for workers like us, healthcare workers like us, to deal with the situations more effectively. Very quickly, this is a picture, which shows the way world has, evoluted in terms of communication, in terms of, how the information is being exchanged from 30,000 BC era, where the cave paintings and the stone carvings were the major way of communicating and sharing the information. And today we have the real time, instant kind of communication, which is happening with the social media like WhatsApp, Twitter, Facebook, and other medias. So during this crisis, like COVID-19 as an example, right? What is needed? What is needed is the full and factual information dissemination about the pandemic, an education on what population need to know, communication for action, communication for change in the behavior, right? Behavior, when I say, a lot of countries don't have the habit of social distancing, right? Most of the nations, the greeting is hug, kiss, etc., etc. That comes very natural to human beings as social beings. But we had to retrain that behavior in order to stop them doing what they are habituated to do, right? That is the communication for change in behavior, in order to go for new practices like social distance or physical distance, in that sense, the hygiene, disease reporting, and quarantine. When it comes to quarantine and disease reporting, there is also a stigma attached to the disease like COVID. The people who get affected, they don't want the others to know that you are diseased by COVID, because probably by knowing, they would keep you, in a low self-esteem kind of situation. The right communication, communicated to last mile person, communication to communicate responsibly, and get upward communication on disease spread pattern, data, etc., etc. That is what is needed. But now, in contrary to that, when we observe what exactly has happened, not always in consonation with what is desired. What was observed was, of course, in most of the times, in terms of the information delivery, the expected goals are met in terms of dissemination, but there are gaps in terms of public behavior, which was exhibited, and which was not, proving to be very effective in terms of communication. The fake news and fear and confusion, which has led to unexpected behavior, were the major issues, which were happening during this pandemic. And lack of understanding of the disease, and also the trust about the information what they received, were also causing a lot of commotion. And most importantly, what we have seen is that there is an information load. There is an avalanche of information, or we call it as infodemic, even in the public health sector, what was happening, which sometimes is going to bury that information, which is actually required. In this avalanche of fake information and disinformation, you would be losing sight of the most important information, what was required for the people to know. How popular is social media? Of course, to this August audience, I may not talk about these numbers. You are all very well aware that almost like 50% of the globe's population today has got access. Just give me a very quick second. I'm so sorry for that. There was a power failure, so I had to very quickly shift onto something. So to this August audience, probably it is like another crisis which has happened just now. Um, so I may not talk too much about how popular is social media and what kind of impact it has. Half of the global population today has got access to all kinds of social media, whether it is a breaker or it is a maker, that is still to be seen. But as far as the clinical practice is concerned, we use it heavily in order to meet certain goals like hand hygiene, antimicrobial resistance, outbreak transmission information, patient and consumer engagement, engagement in terms of education, the personal development of the people, both healthcare workers and also the otherwise, in order to engage the communities, raise the awareness, to go for advocacy, and also to disseminate information, etc., etc. These social media platforms are very widely used. But in the beginning we have discussed that the fake news and the misinformation is becoming a big blow to the efforts which are being done by the most people. So you can see that even World Health Organization and the major organizations are getting impacted because of this fake information and fake news, which is going all around. And you can see some very absurd things like, Bill Gates behind COVID-19 origin. These are the kind of theories, which goes on, which really confuses the people in order to believe or not to believe. And on the other side, some serious, under the disguise of very serious information, there is also a misinformation which goes on, like the BCG vaccine can prevent COVID-19 infection, which is not really at all true. The same way, like Dr. Thaine talked about, that hydrochloroquine, it has been touted to be the miracle medicine for COVID-19, when in reality it is not. So this kind of misinformation, it really confuses not only the general public, but even the scientific community. So
Dr. Ranga, you have 2 minutes.
Absolutely. I am just going to finish it in 2 minutes.
Okay.
What is the communication strategy for the pandemic-like situations? We have got a very clear kind of program where we talk about create, curate, facilitate, and block, which has got all the components which are required in order to give authoritative and factual information, scan the content, use the influencers, and report fake news, etc., etc. During the outbreaks and epidemics and pandemics, the frontline workers like me, we face the situations which I have enumerated here. That is the information availability and access, information overload, right? Reliability and accuracy of the information, misconceptions and rumors, and language and internet access as barriers, because they are available in multiple languages which are not known to the people. Now, since I have very few minutes, I would not talk about the enablers. Enablers, most of the people have talked about. I would straight going to 2 recommendations which we would like to bring it to this forum. One is definitely social media has got a very high impact, and it has got a very high reach. And we as medical professionals, and also all the people who are interested in the public health, should harness social media for better access to information, in line with CDC proclaimed be first, be right, and be credible. Because this is very, very important, especially when it is concerned with the human health is concerned and human, whether when it is a death or life, it becomes very, very important. And the use of technologies like artificial intelligence, machine learning, blockchain, in order to ensure that access to information is accurate during public health emergencies like what we are going through currently. We, just to keep this audience informed, we at Infection Control Academy of India, which is in the forefront of fighting with the infections, not only COVID-19 but all the kind of infections, we are already using machine learning in order to identify what is actually authoritative information and what is not authoritative information. Probably we would like to present it in one of the sessions in the future. Thank you very much. I hope I have put myself within the framework of 15 minutes. Thank you, Dr. Gilwa. Over to you. If there
Thank you
any
very much. Thank you very much. Very interesting presentations. Now we have 5 minutes for each person to answer the questions and comments in the chat. I hope you had seen there are many questions. So I give the floor again to Dr. Anna Belkin to final comments and to discuss the questions that were put by the public. If you want, I can give the floor first to other and then for you, or you are comfortable. We are not hearing you.
Okay. Sorry about that. So there was a very interesting question about the EU resolution to request that each platform set up an independent fact-checking system. Really, was supposed to say fact-checking to develop AI systems for detecting fake news and reports. So this is really interesting. We've seen several initiatives of that sort, and in fact, there was a joint kind of task force from the EU, from I believe AFP, Agence France Presse, and Reporters Sans Frontières, the Reporters Without Borders, to set up some kind of global transparent community for accountability with common standards. And we were actually part of that task force. It was something that was going on for a couple of years. There were multiple meetings, multiple proposals, and unfortunately, we just could not arrive. We could not arrive at the same set of standards. Sadly, when we tried to do this kind of thing on the basis of multiple news organizations as a community, because we had private actors that had their own, that could not be as transparent as this group wanted, for instance, because they'd have to report their earnings and financial interests. They had other public actors that had their own regulatory requirements. So, this is something, this is the kind of initiative that we would be happy to be a part of. That something like that definitely needs to exist, and there need to be these kinds of initiatives worked out, possibly maybe within the UNESCO framework, or by within other international organization framework, so that there is some sort of a leadership. But I think that sadly, this is another one of the initiatives and challenges that illustrates just how difficult it is for everybody to arrive at the same page when dealing with this kind of issue.
Okay, thank you very much. Then Dr. Sridhar.
I'm here. Thank you again, Mr. Gilwan. I have seen the feedback. The questions are not feedback, questions. Well, most of them are, of course, appreciations. Plus, thank you for that appreciation. And then the point some friends raised is, how about human dignity, human rights, and then what kind of relief that we can expect from the system? It's a really big question. Human rights are at stake. Now, in order of survival, I'd like to say first it is human life we should survive out of this pandemic. So what all is required for survival has to be given. That is denied. That is a basic denial of the information. Then second is the access to health information. So where do I get health? Where do I? Some of the private hospitals are not allowed to treat. Government hospitals are given some permissions to treat, but people do not know which hospital has how many beds and where to go. These are the issues. The third aspect is dignity, human dignity. Neither it is available when I am alive, nor when somebody is dead. Now the earth movers are being used to lift the bodies because people are not coming forward and they are being dumped in a crematorial ground. See, this kind of dignity issue also is coming up. So my basic answer to the question, how is that we fix these issues? That is the question raised by one of my friends. My answer is, first of all, give good governance. Be fully responsible in your area of activity. You perform your duty. And next point is, you have some information to share with the people. Please do that without somebody asking for it. Third is, if somebody needs some information, somebody is asking for it, give it. Then fourth is, the independent agencies like information commissions should act independently. To my surprise, somebody gave some information commission gave a request. It requested the authority. My suggestion is, you are given authority to direct the authority to give information. Why do you request? So they are requesting. And then fourth level of access is justice. So if I go to the court of law and knock the doors of justice, it should open. It should open and they should hear and they should give. So the normal functioning is also missing even during the extraordinary situation like COVID. And that created all the problems. So basically what is required is good governance mechanism. Second, transparency. Third, access to information and access to health. Then we don't need even access to justice. So that's what is required.
Thank you very much. Dr. Tajani, please.
Thank you so much. I would like to thank all the participants about the comments and questions. I will try to answer some of them, especially a question made by Therese. She asked how to empower or educate each other to manage this bias of the population, this belief system. What we are trying, we are facing this moment that it's a really complex moment. As Anna Belkin said, there is different control system, there is different information system, as Dr. Ranga also said. So we have many challenges for it. What we are doing here in Federal Fluminense University in Brazil is combining different disciplinaries, different multi-transdisciplinary actions to make it more robust strategy to face this moment and to empower people, to educate people, combining the development of technologies based on artificial intelligence, combined with audiovisual media, podcasts, and different formats to make the people think about their belief system. But we know that it's not so simple. We need to make more efforts, national and globally efforts to tackle with this moment of disputes of narrative, not just this moment of disinformation, but these disputes of narratives. So I guess it's the way to make the people not only think about science, but also trying to include them into the process of doing science, investing in science education, investing in this comprehension that break the walls of the universities, the walls of the science institutions, because we are part of society. We are not a part of society. So we need to involve and think that science is a public good. So we need to provide access in different ways, not only publishing our results or our data, but including people, understanding that access and participation, it's more important than the publication, the final publication. And that is it. Thank you so much for all the comments.
Thank you very much. Dr. Buri Rangareddy, please, you have time to answer the questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gilwan. Thank you all participants. Of course, on this platform, probably the role of healthcare professional probably is really questionable, but still, in terms of access to information, after the COVID-19 happened, I think, we as healthcare workers also have a very vital role to play in order to improve the situation. One of the questions what has been posed by Helen Amunga is that what and where do we pick up what to preserve about COVID-19, given all the global challenges associated with the COVID-19 data and information. As I told in my opening lines, as far as the healthcare is concerned, both the data and information availability, accessibility, and other parameters are very, very poor. Not only in India, but even on the global scale, it is the same. My view is that both the global organizations like World Health Organization, UN, and the individual respective national governments really had to invest a lot, not only into healthcare infrastructure, but also building the databases and ensuring that the right information is going to be available, especially during the crisis like COVID-19 to the people in a very fast and accurate way. One of the presentations we have made to the authorities in India very recently is to build a national database of all the hospitals which are available in cases of so-called deadly infections. I'm using a layman term here. What we call is highly virulent infections, so that the people are aware that where to go in case if they get affected with one or the other infection, and also help in their own communities the people to direct them to get the right kind of help without actually pondering, without actually going around all the places, which has happened during COVID-19. Most of the people, first of all, were not aware of the disease, its manifestations. And once actually they know about the manifestations, they did not know whom to approach, how to approach, and where to get the proper treatment. So to build, kind of build that gap, data dissemination and data centralization is going to be very, very vital going ahead for all the governments world over. And the second question, what had been talked about by Professor Dorothy Gordon, is that am I not worried that the Indian population relies on platforms over which they do not have control? Well, as a public health professional, I am not really worried about the platforms. I would be more worried about how quickly to make the information available. As far as current information dissemination is concerned, they are of course poor. They are radio and TV in most instances. We have a kind of explosive use of social media like WhatsApp, but that is not a right medium to communicate, because there is always a possibility of distortion and making the same message actually by the time it reaches the last person, probably it would be so distorted, probably it would be meaningless. But yes, I am not really worried about the platforms. I am more worried about actually for future building the right kind of social media platforms in order to communicate very effectively and safely to the population. There are some other questions. I don't know how much time I have, but I will try till Dr. Gilvan is going to stop me. So another question which has come from is about how do you see the role of AI and blockchain to fight COVID-19? Very, very simple, madam. As far as I am concerned, I am not a technology person, but still we do believe that both artificial intelligence and also blockchain could be very good fighters against the calamities, especially the health calamities. AI would be useful in order to filter out all that fake news and fake information, disinformation. That is definitely there. And blockchain, as you all know, that it is a kind of information system which would not allow the information to be distorted. Even if there is any distortion, we can go back and identify. So why I would say blockchain is, we have seen some of the instances when World Health Organization and the Indian government kind of information was imposted, saying that this is the information which is coming from World Health Organization, or this is the information which is coming from Indian health authorities, that such and such product is very, very useful, or such and such practice is very useful and you should follow. So if there is a blockchain, we could avoid that, because nobody would be able to kind of imposter the information. That is what I see as a healthcare professional, the role of AI, blockchain, and also ML. How
Okay.
information? Yeah, sorry.
Okay, Dr. Ranga, thank you very much. Our time is coming to the end. I would like to thank you and to thank everybody for the participation, all four speakers that brought so many contributions to information war, policies for migrants, the scientific production information, the place and role of social media in this geopolitics of information. So in name of our UNESCO chair on language policies for multilingualism, I thank you all. Our 25 universities in 14 countries, many of our members are participating in the debate. And I thank Dr. Rao for the efforts, the technological efforts made in Hyderabad, and give you the floor back. Yeah. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Jilwan, for chairing the session. I also thank all the speakers on behalf of the organizing committee of the conference, all the speakers for their wonderful presentations. Thank you very much. Before we break for 5 minutes, I would like to remind to the participants that there is a poll available online. Please give your opinion about today's session, number one. Number two, that the draft of the Hyderabad Declaration, which we are going to introduce in the valediction for the in principle approval of the conference, is available in the conference website. Please have a look and suggest your inputs in the chat box. Thank you. Let's have a break for 5 minutes.
Hello, Eve, can you hear me? You're muted, I cannot hear you.
Active my micro. Okay.
Are you enjoying the conference?
Yeah, I find it was very nice, especially today. I am sorry because what I will present is more general, and I didn't apply to COVID-19. That's a pity.
I don't think it is an issue because many of the people who are listening will be able to make the connections.
I hope.
You know. Yeah. Okay. But I think that the issue of you know, on the first day we did address, and I think it was Pierre Emmanuel who actually brought up issues to do with hegemonic intent. But I think that we are glossing over the deliberate behavioral modification techniques that are used. And those have raised serious ethical concerns. So I'm relying on you to be able to pick that up.
Okay, so you will see, and after that, please comment it, and do not hesitate to criticize.
I have already commented it in the chat from the last session, and I asked you to talk about it.
Okay, I will do.
I see Bester is here as well. How are you, Bester?
Thank you, Dorothy. No, I'm fine. Far away from.
Are you enjoying your retirement from the African Center for Information Ethics?
I wish it was part of a retirement plan, but we are running a number of other projects at the moment, which once I have more detail, I will inform you about. But for now, I'm going to discuss the possibility to just see this process through as IFAP chair until 2021. But okay. I want to first make sure that our Secretary General and the CI sector chairperson is happy with that. And,
yes, I actually had a meeting with them earlier this week, and they assured me that they will be briefing you. I'm sure I met with Nozifo, and yes, I met with Carlton. Yeah, so they explained to me the situation with the African Center for Information Ethics, and I asked if they could ask the university to be clear so that we know who we would be talking to now that you have resigned from it. Yes. But I was very happy to hear that you are still the chair of the South African IFAP committee. I had a very good meeting with the UN yesterday. I will be briefing everybody about it later.
Oh, that is good. That is good. No, thank you very much. I came in to also comment on what you just told Prof. Eve. A fact is that the overview of this conference should somewhere have an impact on, and I hope it's through your office maybe, to the World Health Organization, which I find, you know, in a terrible state of fighting for their existence amongst many other political games that are played, you know, and I feel so sorry for them in trying to share information, which is critical and crucial for many countries.
All right.
That is a very good point, Bester. I think that we will have to do some serious work to pull out some of the key findings from the papers and the recommendations, something a little bit more succinct than we have in the Hyderabad Declaration, but definitely to reach out to WHO will be I think something quite useful. Excellent suggestion. Thank you.
Yeah, the other one is the ITC, the post office communication.
You mean ITU?
ITU, sorry, I forgot that.
Yeah.
The ITU. You know, if we can assist you in, you know, gearing up that international or global network for communication between the different sectors, we must definitely strengthen your hand.
Well, ITU, as you know, historically, ITU has focused on the more technical aspects of communication, very much focused on infrastructure. And UNESCO is where we have the focus on the societal implications. And that is why in the WSIS follow-up, we have both of these two UN organizations being given clear roles within the WSIS follow-up. So definitely we have within ITU, we have Doreen, who is in charge of the development dimension. She's a personal friend, so I can always follow up with her. But I think that as UNESCO, we have that mandate globally, and we just have to try and see how we can fulfill that mandate more effectively.
Wonderful, thank you. That is a very good remark, and it will focus our attention also on some of those.
Dorothy, I support totally the Ben remarks. I think we need to have some cooperation between international organizations. I'm sorry.
Sir.
That we have to.
Can we start?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Please. Sorry to cross you, gentlemen.
No problem. We can talk later. See you later.
Yeah, definitely. It's quite clear.
Yeah, welcome to the final and second session of today's conference. Now, I request Professor Kudze Bester to chair this session.
Thank you very much, Chair. And I am also going to be quite strict on the times because we need to also attend to other matters hereafter. But I must say that Dr. Simmons was very kind with me yesterday. So Dr. Simmons, if you want to take 2 or 3 hours for your presentation, you're more than welcome. I put you on the stand for 15 minutes, sir.
Okay, so I will just attempt this share screen now. Where is this? Now, does that come through okay?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay. Now, I've never tried this share screen before, so it's now let me see. Here we go.
The little green
there we go. Outstanding.
Okay, thank you.
So, okay, my presentation, the right to information and not manipulation, lessons from COVID-19 pandemic. So, I mean, what we see here is something quite extraordinary because on the one hand, you have a physical crisis in terms of a threat to values, a period of uncertainty, time constraint, and such issues. But there's also an intangible element of this crisis, and this relates to the very volatile political environment, which creates a volatile informational environment. And so you have attempts to prime and mobilize audiences and publics for or against different political calls to resolve the crisis. And so you have together this idea of a physical crisis, but there's an informational crisis which is going around it, little channels of information which are going in different directions. And I mean, if we look at what is the problem with this, well, during a crisis such as this, you need accurate and timely, reliable information, even more. So this is objectively speaking, but subjectively speaking, you get a lot more temptation to manipulate the situation for different gains. And this can certainly be seen. There are existing legal frameworks and ethical frameworks to protect information and imparting information and reliability of information, etc. The European Convention on Human Rights, Article 10, paragraphs 1 and 2, for example. This has been brought up various times, including a Council of Europe conference in which I was the general rapporteur back in 2005. There's nothing new about informational problems around physical crises. But if we look at it, I mean, the sheer scale of the informational crisis in this one is a bit alarming. And if we go back even further, I mean, news, the role of news, and this is before COVID, and that is, what was news? I mean, if we think about it in terms of an ideal theoretical condition, news is about informing people so that they can better cope with things which impact on their daily lives. However, now if we look at it, it's no longer really about that. And you've even got these terms, interpretive journalism, journalism, different things which have already moved away from this ideal of objectivity to something more interpreted, if we want to call it that. So moving away from just the facts to an interpretation of the facts. And looking at Edward Bernays, the father of modern public relations, I mean, as far back as 1947, he said in his article, which was The Engineering of Consent, that there is no coincidence in the nature or timing of the news. It appears for a certain reason at a certain time. And this is concerning what him and Walter Lippmann and others from the Committee for Public Information were contemplating, how to manipulate public opinion in a democracy in order to generate the consent they need for rule. And so you get these different contradictions that result from it. So if we look at COVID-19 as a crisis, does it fit the description of the three parts, threat to values, time constraint, and uncertainty? Well, certainly it does. I mean, it's a threat to values, not only human health and life, but also other values such as economic well-being, freedom of movement, well, one can even say freedom of expression, which is one thing which I will take up a little bit later. Uncertainty. In the upheaval, there's been a much elevated sense of risk due to the chaos, due to the uncertainty of information. This is the one thing which is a problem, because although governments have been talking about fake news and so forth, they do not know what the actual truth is, because they keep on changing the word the whole time. And yet you've got governments, you've got media, you've got social media giants that are dictating what is true and what is not by some kind of arbitrary fact checking on facts which are not exactly known at this point in time. Time constraint. The longer the COVID crisis goes on, the more damage is done. And definitely you can see that. You can see that on a number of different scales. We're talking about, for instance, the increased rate of suicides because of lockdowns. This is something which is not really brought up. People are killing themselves because of the social distancing, because of these draconian measures which are being imposed. Also, one can see the cancellations of usual medical services. People are dying from other diseases. I mean, the whole world doesn't stop with these other sources of death because COVID is here. And so cancer and so forth is going undetected, going untreated. And often these accumulations of things like suicides and preventable deaths with preventative medicine are in some cases even more than the deaths of people with or from COVID. And yeah, so we've got time constraint. And also one is also looking at the economic effects of this, because the world is likely to have a serious economic crash when things start to ease up. It's being hidden, masked at the moment, but when it does come out in its full form, then we can start to look what kinds of effects on public health poverty is going to have, and these kinds of issues. So we can have a look at the issue of fear, because fear has been one of the things which has been used to drive these very undemocratic and not really publicly discussed measures which are being used. And so what is fear? I mean, fear, first of all, something bad can happen. A medical crisis such as a virus, and that thing can happen to someone personally. So this personalized sense. And this has been driven. And this is based on the distinction that people have between voluntary risk and involuntary risk. Some people will choose to take a risk. Smoking, for example. They know that it can kill them, but they choose to take it. Or involuntary risk. That is having something imposed upon you, a nuclear power plant built in the area, a 5G station built in the area. So this creates the issue because there is a distinction between risk from the point of view of those taking the risk. Is it one they choose to take, or one that they feel is imposed? And this can be seen in the split in the public at the moment, because there are those who see this as a voluntary risk, that they can go out if they want to without a lockdown, because they choose to adhere to the lockdown because the risk. It's being seen as something threatening to them. But if it's an involuntary risk, that is that they feel the impositions outweigh the benefits, then they will likely go against the lockdown and these kinds of things. And so this can be seen where you have fear being driven in the information from media and governments. And so it's a matter of persuasion rather than information. If we look in I think it was the Times recently in the UK, there was an article on page 5. So, and what was this article? Well, it said 2 to 3 times more people have died that month of ordinary flu than coronavirus. And it was buried on page 5. And so, I mean, this is not a very honest form of communication. And this is, in fact, I'd go as far to say manipulation. And what this has done is it's created a situation where people have been cognitively forced or coerced to take a trade.
Dr. Greg, 2 hours has passed. You still have 3 minutes.
Okay, so this idea of trading civil liberties for the illusion of security. And of course, no one knows exactly how to be completely protected by this, which has an infection fatality rate, according to the WHO, of somewhere between 0.5 to 1%. So between 5 to 10 people out of every 1,000 who catch it can perish from it or of it. And this is the other issue about the lack of information, because there is no distinction between people who die with coronavirus and people who die of coronavirus. So if they die of coronavirus, this is one thing. But if there are other medical preconditions which make them more susceptible, like in Melbourne recently, you had 7, 8 people die with coronavirus. Okay, so check that group. None of them were under 80. A majority of them had advanced dementia. And you had a complete lockdown again, and people were physically manhandled by police in a brutal way on the streets because of this. And so there is little public information about this trade, which liberties have gone. And so we got this fear-based approach of manipulating publics. This will last for so long, one can see already that it's starting to fade, because you're getting, especially in Germany of places, quite a pushback against it. But for example, the contradictions are clear. In the United States, you can riot in the streets. That is okay, but you cannot open a cafe or a small restaurant. Donald Trump has been criticized for even thinking about the idea of delaying an election as being undemocratic. Yet, Jacinda Ardern, when she had 5 people with coronavirus, infected, not dead, delay the elections. So you're getting all these different things which creep into it. The main battleground for this is in social media. And this is seen, but I mean, this is just a superficial problem, because it runs much deeper than that. So, I mean, if we look at
your time officially up.
Okay, so I mean, I'll just for people to quickly read. I mean, the main problem is the 2 issues. There needs to be a fundamental rethinking of the way we approach communicating and dealing with information, because communication should be first and foremost as a public good, not as something to accumulate an advantage for a specific group. And information, well, I mean, this has been seen. This has been one of the problems, the rush to get out there with partial results, with inconclusive results, and publish them, because media wish to do it, academics wish to do it, but then this is misinformation, quite often the case. So I will finish there, so that that goes, so that you don't have to resort to some kind of virtual violence against me. No. So I will just now figure out how to, yes, this is the one.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gregory. Interesting. I'm not a contribution. I'm not going to respond to it now. Dr. Eve, can you maybe take us through your presentation, please? Your microphone is still off. There you are.
This one. Okay. I think you can see now. That's okay.
It's
Okay.
busy coming. It's there. You can continue.
Okay. Thanks a lot. Okay. I do suppose I can do it now. So you see my presentation. I'm very glad to be among you, at least virtually. I regret it. Just 2 words as regards myself. I am an academic people, I am a lawyer, and I'm living close to Brussels, the headquarters of the European Union. That explains my point of view and perhaps also the limits of this point of view. My speech tries to answer to the 2 following questions. Why do we need infoethics? And which ethical values we need? As our digital age, with AI, big data, and other emerging technologies, the question becomes every day more important. It is interesting to underline that the question is at the agenda of a lot of international organizations. I've been pointed to certain of them, OECD, Council of Europe, EU Parliament, and it's a very interesting proposition containing recommendation to the Commission on a framework of ethical aspects in artificial intelligence, robotics, and related technology, dated from April of this year. But last but not least, it is also chairman of the IFIP Working Group on Infoethics, an honor to mention the setting up by UNESCO of an ad hoc expert group on ethics and artificial intelligence. This group is responsible for putting in writing a proposal for an international convention on the ethics of the development of artificial intelligence. The first outcomes of its work seem very encouraging. Why that concern about infoethics? We are embedded. We are embedded in our digital society. I mean that digital is everywhere, is ubiquitous, definitely not only in our office, but also from now on in our autonomous car, in our walls, through connected loudspeaker, in our closets, in our pockets, in our bodies. We are surrounded both by networks infrastructure with an infinite capacity still increasing as regard the capacity of storing, of processing, and of transmitting of data. And in the same time, we are surrounded by nano terminals connected to the infrastructure, collecting data at each moment of our life, including our blood pressure, or hesitation in front of a product in a supermarket, and so on. It is forecast that in 2025, each European people per day will be in contact with 4,800 connected devices or terminals. Digital brings many benefits to our life and frees us from many constraints. But at the same time, certain risks must be underlined and avoided. First of all, the system, the terminal, the data flows, the algorithms processing data are working opacally. And I never know where my data are flowing, for whom and for which usage. Second point, robots are invading our daily life and definitively seem endowed with human capacity like speech, thoughts, and ability for decision and action, and that according to rules I do ignore. Third point, the AI systems are functioning sometimes with error or bias. They are functioning through complex statistical aggregation, continuously evolving. They are working on huge big data and connecting different neural networks. The systems are able to predict the future, not only for each of us, but also for society, what I call the algorithmic individual or societal governmentality. Fourth point, this AI system have the capacity to manipulate both our minds, the famous nudges, the fake news, and even our being. Genetic manipulation is henceforth a reality thanks to an NBIC and generates the myth of the augmented man. All these risks are all the more important as the informational power is concentrated in the hands of increasing powerful companies like the US GAFAM and their China sister, the BATX, which impose on states their global regulation. So the ethical question is pregnant and central. It might be summarized as follows. If digital might be considered as the building block of our society, of our life, of our identity, or can we individually, as human and collectively as democratic society, keep control of such a fast, complex, protean, ubiquitous innovation with unpredictable application? Human in the loop, human on the loop, asserted recently the EU high-level group of experts on AI. I am convinced with them that it is fundamental that we, as humans, individually, but also collectively, in our democratic society, we must keep the mastership of the development of our digital society. To reflection, to analyze more in depth the ethical values we have to promote and their significance in our digital society. First, ethics might not be reduced to moral values. Ethics refers to individual and collective pragmatic reflection. That reflection requires that each of us, individually or collectively, facing concrete situations like COVID and its challenge, reflects in a clearly situated context on what the good and the just means and acts according to the judgment while taking into account those around us. Second, the risk linked by the development of our digital society, especially with artificial intelligence, are not only a risk to be supported by individuals, like threats to our privacy or limits to our freedom of expression. As regards this first category of risk, we have good answer, notably with data protection, at least if they are effective. But more and more, we have to consider collective risk, since AI application might affect directly groups of individuals, but also the functioning of our local, ethnic, philosophical communities, of our markets, and of our democracy. So I come to the second point, which ethical values. UNESCO Convention on Bioethics is a good source of inspiration, and that for different reasons. The aim of the convention is to be recalled, since it is the same aim that we must pursue today with the idea of a global UNESCO Convention on Infoethics, convinced that it is necessary and that it is time for the international community to set out universal ethical principles on which humanity can respond to the growing dilemmas and controversies that science and technology pose to humanity and the environment. Secondly, the Bioethics Convention is based on 4 fundamental ethical values universally recognized. I mean, common to all the nations around the world. That's very important. These ethical values are deeply affected by the development of our digital society. I quote these 4 ethical values. First, the dignity. According to Immanuel Kant, the famous German philosopher, respect of human dignity implies that you never are authorized to consider an individual as a tool, but always as a target. That value has to be recalled at a time where more and more people are reduced to data and considered such, and at a moment where through their data, they might be manipulated as indicated above. It is important also that we clearly assert that robots are not human people, and that human people are always liable for what robots are doing. Second value, the autonomy. Autonomy is another word for self-determination. enacted by the legal terms of privacy, which is more than data protection and covers what Nobel Prize, Indian Nobel Prize, Amartya Sen has developed with the concept of capabilities. It means the obligation for the states to put or to impose to private companies to put at the disposal of each individual the reasonable means for developing his or her own personality in a peculiar society. Applying this concept to our digital society, it means first to give education to people in order to understand the main feature of our digital society. It means the information literacy. It means the possibility for use, it means the possibility for people to disconnect the terminal surrounding him or her. It means above all, the transparency of the digital flows and the processing about his or her data, and definitely the right to have a human explanation and recourse about the decision taken by the machine. Finally, autonomy presupposes that you have, even if limited, a possibility of choice. Are you free if for accessing to a web page or service, you are forced to accept cookies and all the end purposes imposed by the operators? Thirdly, the social justice. Social justice implies that all the actors involved in the development or deployment of AI systems pay attention to avoid bias and error, which lead to discrimination between groups of people. It might be the age or the sex of candidates to unemployment. It might be the distrust vis-à-vis certain communities suspected of future criminal offenses. It might be the fact that certain people, according to their common profiles, will have to pay more than others do for the same service, or will be excluded as regards.
Dr. Eve, you have about 3 minutes left.
Okay, no problem at all. I will finish of our apartment rentals. In the same time, I think we have to analyze and to extend the concept of universal digital service accessible to everyone. This concept must be, in my opinion, extended to service like access to social network, access to search engine platform, which in our modern digital society are considered as vital. The service must be adequately regulated. The last principle is expressed as follows: do good and do not harm. The design of the technology must be value sensitive. All the actors involved in the conception, deployment, and use of the system, AI system, robots, other IT technology, have to assume their social responsibility. They have to ensure that their technology complies with ethical values, bring optimal social, environmental, and economic outcomes, and that does not result in injury or harm of any kind to being caused to individuals or society. The design of the technology has to be done under human scrutiny and audited not only from a technical point of view, but also as regards the social and human impacts of their implementation. The most risky technological development would have to be assessed by an external and independent body. This last reflection leads us to the two recommendations asked by the organizer. I quote them: beyond protection of individual interests, there is a need to consider seriously the collective challenge, competition, democracy, and above all, discrimination of digital society are facing. In order to help companies and administration to assume their social responsibility, it would be necessary to set up national and international data ethics agencies. My idea is more or less like the Greek idea. This ethical agency must be interdisciplinary, multi-stakeholder, joining together representatives of diverse interest concerns, human rights association, consumer protection agency, IT companies, administration. This ethics agency have to work transparently and be open to public debates, and especially They have to evaluate themselves or through laboratory institutions the risk caused by AI system, robots, and emerging technology, and to raise public awareness. Infoethics is too important not to be taken seriously. Please, no ethics bashing.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot for your attention, Ben.
You are exactly in time. And thank you for these ideas. I think it is also part of a summary of other ideas that came out, which is very important that it's also put into a legal perspective. Dr. Malik, I don't want to put pressure on you, but the participants went up with about 10% when Dr. Eve spoke. So let's see if you can even raise those number of participants. You have your 15 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah. I'll first share my slide. Yeah.
Please.
Please tell me when it is visible to you. Okay. Yeah.
You push the green button. There you are.
Are you
It's
able
coming.
to see it?
Within a second from now.
Okay, not able to hear you. Give me a minute. Hello.
Yes, I can hear you, but your screen is not shared yet.
Okay, give me a minute.
Okay.
I think, yeah, okay. I'm sorry, I think something happened with the internet connection. Yeah. It's raining outside, so.
It's busy uploading, but it's not there yet.
Okay.
There you are.
You're able to hear me? I'm audible?
Yes. You are audible and we can see your presentation. You're welcome to continue.
Sure. I'll just put it in slide show mode. Yeah. Is it clear now?
100%. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So thank you, Dr. Bester. I also thank Professor Prabhakar, Professor Shivaprasad.
Dr. Malik, we lost your connection. Can you still hear us? Dear participants, let's just be patient for a moment. Dr. Malik, if you want to, you can maybe not share the presentation and save on the data available and address us.
May I suggest something?
Yes, please, Prof. Rao.
Yeah, maybe in the meantime, you can ask the previous speakers to respond to the participants' question summarize. In the meantime, maybe she will join us.
Okay, we'll do that.
Save time.
Yes.
Hello. Sorry, sorry. I think the internet connection is unstable. So yeah, you're able to see the presentation. Or do I share it again?
No, we cannot see your presentation.
I'm sorry about this. Yeah, the internet is. It's unstable here. So issues of technology.
Thank you. We can see your presentation. You can continue.
All right. I hope I'll get that extra time. Okay. All right. So I'll thank Dr. Bester again. Thank you to Professor Prabhakar Rao, Professor Shivaprasad, Rachel for facilitating the conference, all the centers collaborating in putting this together. I especially thank the UNESCO India team for their support in always to us. Also Dorothy Gordon, IFAP chair, for managing to get us all here to deliberate on matters that are so crucial to our everyday. I'm Kanchan K. Malik, Professor, Department of Communication and Faculty Fellow with the UNESCO Chair on Community Media, University of Hyderabad. As you can see, my paper is titled Vocal for Local Information During COVID-19 Pandemic, Role of Community Radios in Addressing the Digital Divide in South Asia. I hope my voice is clear and the presentation is visible.
Everything is well. You can continue.
Great. I hope it continues like this. All right. So I'll start by connecting community radios and information for all during COVID-19. Well, community radio, or I'll refer to it as CR in the paper, is gaining recognition worldwide as an effective tool for grassroots communication, autonomous perspectives, local representation, and decentralized media access. The democratic and participatory processes of community radio embrace all the 6 priority areas of the IFAP program. That is information for development, information literacy, information preservation, accessibility, multilingualism, and of course, information ethics. So this association became more pronounced, and as you have seen in all the presentations in the conference, during the COVID-19 pandemic, as the CR stations across South Asia rose to the challenges and employed creative ways to serve as platforms for access to information and knowledge during these arduous times. So my paper, before making any recommendations, first gives an overview of how CR stations contributed to community awareness, community preparedness, and community participation that served as key catalysts to combat the coronavirus pandemic in South Asia, and we are still fighting it. Deriving from some conversations as part of the global dialogues that UNESCO Chair on Community Media conducted, where I had interacted with some of the key stakeholders in community radio in South Asia. This section of the paper analyzes how community radio emerged as a credible and vital link between the government and the people at the grassroots, and played an important role in accomplishing the true spirit of IFAP's priorities. In the second section, the paper foregrounds digital divide as an information ethics issue that signifies a series of social gaps and perpetuates inequities in access to, and in the case of community radio, the production of relevant information, and thus poses serious challenges of exclusions. I argue that CR stations across South Asia came up with a multiplicity of contributions during these difficult times that proved beyond doubt that community radio is not just about making radio, it is about serving communities and reaching the unreached. Therefore, the mixed models combining the internet with the terrestrial broadcasting used by community radio stations need to be adopted to make information and knowledge accessible to people on both sides of the digital divide. So let us now look at community radio and information for development. As stated by a community radio advocate who's from Bangladesh, I'll quote him, in time of crisis, information saves life and livelihoods, unquote. The 16 non-commercial, locally run and mostly volunteer operated CR stations in Bangladesh have been broadcasting COVID-19 information with the backing of the Youth Network for Communication since March this year, with a combined audience of 6.8 million people, they sought to mobilize community response for collective action in support of the efforts by civil society organizations to contain COVID-19. Being among the world's most densely populated countries, the behavioral change efforts by community radio in Bangladesh, directed at mobilizing social distancing, and over 165 hours of programming per day regarding the coronavirus prevention education, while simultaneously also seeking government support for keeping community people's daily life normal and livelihoods functioning. All of this has captured international attention. In India too, community radio producers have generated innovative programming, including plays, sometimes while working from home, on nutrition, immunity, uses of traditional food practices, and more. Next is community radio and information accessibility. Out of the 77 districts in Nepal, almost 25 districts, there are no other media outlets except community radio. Therefore, in the times of crisis, such as the pandemic like this, it is basically community radios that people are relying on, especially in these 25 districts where there is no other form of media to receive the right and relevant information. Then there is also the issue of online media giving rise to a lot of disinformation. It has come up in the earlier presentations also. In Nepal, Bangladesh, and India, community radio stations have responded to the hunger for accurate information by responsibly broadcasting verified local information in real time, as well as locally produced content based on reliable and authentic sources. They have dealt with a lot of myths also, and superstitions and other issues that came up during this period. Now, moving on to community radio and multilingualism, the essence of community radio lies in its localness. And an indispensable corollary is that all broadcasts, including the programs on COVID-19, are in the local language, or rather the local dialect, and sometimes in thick rural accent. The content produced speaks directly to people in their own idiom and context. Community radio affords plurality and diversity in their content, and whether it is airing folk songs around the theme of social distancing and isolation, or disseminating information from studios with the mask on about government scheme, it is all done in local languages. Community radios in India have responded creatively to making the COVID-19 vocabulary, like quarantine. To some people, it sounded like a warrant. So quarantine, pandemic, local lockdown, physical distancing, asymptomatic, hand hygiene, PPE, N95, and of course, vaccine, accessible for their listeners, and even come up with local, more appropriate alternatives suggested by the communities themselves for better understanding of meanings. Bringing in community radio and information literacy, CR stations have played a crucial role, not only in providing access to locally relevant information, but also in the continuous fight with disinformation. With social media being taken over by misinformation and quackery, it is being misused for spreading what is now being described, again, this was there in today's session, the infodemic, that is harmful, biased, manipulated, and outright false information. The effort of community radio is to stick to verified and scientific information. Given the limited resources that community radios have at hand, this is easier said than done. But their struggle is on, not only to tackle fake posts, but also to provide listeners with valuable, locally produced content. CR stations have been building the capacities of their reporters by developing guidelines regarding safety of journalists during this period and the ethical aspects of covering stories in the times of crisis, especially in the times of pandemic. Let's now consider community radio and information preservation. The World Association of Community Radio Broadcasters, as many of you might be knowing of it as EMAC, for the Asia Pacific region, in collaboration with its member stations in several countries, has embarked on what they call Community Radio Campaign Against COVID-19. Through the campaign, scripts for short public announcements about safeguarding against the pandemic are being created and shared through networks, especially with vulnerable communities such as women in special conditions, poor people and farmers, or people suffering from mental stress, and as it was mentioned, probably even fear. So this series is available online. It contains professionally researched and validated information. It is curated in partnership with national and regional offices of WHO, UNESCO, UNDP, UNICEF, FAO, and several other credible organizations, and may be accessed by CR stations to create content of their own. So from servicing the IFAP's priorities to a tool for bridging the digital divide, let us do an information ethics analysis. Let us do an analysis from the information ethics perspective. So as a community radio scholar with an inclination towards participatory communication, my concern has always been with unheard voices and those at the periphery of the information society. I find it reasonable to go with the scholars who have attempted to move beyond the prevailing notions of a dichotomous digital divide that separates the internet haves and have-nots. There exists an extensive literature now. I'm not dipping into all of it, but this literature has endeavored to articulate a more nuanced reconceptualization of the digital divide. And I would especially go with Tawani, who approaches digital divide ultimately as an ethical issue. The digital divide
Doctor,
is not
you still have 3 minutes.
Okay, all right. The digital divide is not binary and represents multifaceted problems of inequalities and disparities based on class, caste, gender, age, culture, literacy, geopolitical location, and more. Thus, issues concerning information ethics and digital divide during the pandemic, and I quote Capuro now here, quote, should not be considered just a problem of technical access to the internet, but as an issue of how people can better manage their lives using new interactive digital media, avoiding the dangers of cultural exploitation, homogenization, colonialism, and discrimination. Therefore, for an inclusive and equitable information society, plurality of information, hybridization of technology, which is what I'm talking about, and polyphony are the ethical markers. For this to happen, the analog technology of community radio must converge with the digital to enhance the last mile outreach in communities that do not have access to reliable mobile networks and internet. Additionally, local must be focal and information must cater to local needs and realities. We have seen so far that as nations went under lockdown, forced to close their borders and impose quarantine, CR stations were on air supporting their listeners in the most ingenious ways, disseminating vital, verified, and village level information in local dialects through various formats, songs, skits, folk tales, and even through phone-ins. From furnishing accurate and timely information about COVID-19 to tackling anxieties and fears, from identifying rumors and busting fake news to hosting quiz shows on coronavirus and playing specially curated song lists, from running radio schooling initiatives to setting up helplines for psychological counseling of people feeling lonely and against domestic violence, the CR sector has been leading from front and staying engaged with the community. Now that brings me to the recommendations, and the paper goes on to make the recommendations that you can read also. I'll give a summary that given the community connect exhibited by the CR stations in the wake of the pandemic, and this is especially relevant in South Asia, and their relevance in addressing the digital divide, efforts must be made to integrate them in all formal national level mechanisms for access to information and knowledge, especially in the age of digitization and digital media. At the same time, it is essential to strengthen the collective fact-checking capacities of local communities themselves to counter misinformation. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Malink. This was wonderful, and you were just in time. Thank you for that. Ladies and gentlemen, may I request that we then go to the questions and the remarks and the discussion that was listed on the chat. And let's start with you again, Dr. Greg. Are you ready to respond?
As always, ready to throw in a few cats among the pigeons. Okay. Well, I've been responding to the chat, but I think one of the main things that comes out of this informational and ethical aspects of the coronavirus, I mean, it's not always a question of scarcity of information. This is the case in some areas, but this is reducing quite a lot. The main problem for many, and increasingly many now, is the quality of information which is coming. And it's poor quality. I mean, as I said in my presentation, and as I write in the paper which I submitted, I mean, a lot of this has been rushed. Media first to be published so that they can sell the newspapers or advertising time, things like this. So they have a financial incentive. I mean, if we look at the medical system, it's been incentivized to list people financially as dying from coronavirus. I mean, just look at the case in Florida. A young man who was killed in a motorbike crash was listed as dying of coronavirus, not a motorbike crash. And that's one of the more absurd ones, but you got a whole list of them. There also needs to be a clear distinction between people who die of coronavirus and people who die with coronavirus. And there's an absolute distortion of statistics. I mean, they're not mentioning other deaths. They're not distinguishing between these. They're not saying, well, like in Australia, X number, those 8 people who died were above 80 years old, and a lot of them had dementia. I mean, these are all high-risk groups. I mean, it's terrible they died, but they're much more vulnerable than the usual infection fatality rate, which they tend to avoid, which is 0.5 to 1%. You try to bombard people into fear by just giving sheer numbers without any context. You know, X number of people have died of coronavirus, not mentioning that it's also with and all these other complexes. And that's just driving the fear. And this fear is being exploited. It's being exploited financially. If we look at what happened with the billionaires in the US who increased their profits by, I think it was 2/3 of $1 trillion, the top businessmen, where many people are facing these problems of daily existence. They have nothing, and they have even less now. And you'll see all these foreclosures which come when things start to operate again. So, I mean, there is no context now. This is being milked, but my prediction is that there's going to be a backlash. I mean, you're seeing a backlash in Germany. You're seeing beginnings of it in other countries against this. So this is my, if we want, happy prediction. I mean, what George Orwell and Aldous Huxley predicted is nothing compared to what we're living today. So this is my little reign of doom and gloom with a possibility of some kind of happiness in the future.
Thank you, Dr. Greg. I think one can also, I think you mentioned the ecosystem of fear. And when people become frustrated and anxious, then they are more positive towards thinking in terms of radical behavior. Dr. Dorothy's team in Kenya is working on a document on radicalization amongst the youth at this time. Thank you very much. Wonderful contribution, and I think it fits into the topic very, very well. Thank you very much. Dr. Eve?
Okay, Ben. I have 3 questions. So the first one is about Data Ethics Commission. The second one is about universal service and private companies. And the third one is about the problem of ethics in education. I start with the first. I like this question because it was raised as a provocative question. You imagine, and they say, Poulet, you do imagine that we will create Data Ethics Commission. It is a dream, it is not a reality. I say, first, we need this Data Ethics Commission when you see the challenges raised by the new technologies. And I take a certain number of examples: automated cars, all the problems of the coexistence between automated cars and other cars, the problem of liability, the question of the question of ownership of these automated cars. This question must be publicly debated. I take another example, keyless robot. A third example, you know that in a certain British school, they use AI system as a way for predicting the ability of pupils to become marvelous students. So they create a certain discrimination. I think all this question must be publicly debated. I come now to the hope I have to see this Data Ethics Commission created. First, I see that this Data Ethics Commission are still existing. UK is creating one. Germany, Denmark has already created one. I see that European Commission has decided in the white paper to support the idea to have a Data Ethics Commission working on a very global analysis of all the risk of AI systems and to evaluate the AI system which will be conceived in the future. And definitely, if you have a look at the resolution of the European Parliament, I was very surprised to discover it. It is incredible. And they say, we need this Data Ethics Commission, and we want to give a certain number of competencies. And they propose a regulation to the Commission. The second question is the problem of universal service. Once again, the person say, perhaps you are dreaming. It is quite clear that private companies will never accept the fact that a certain number of their services, quite lucrative, would be monopolized by the state again. I say that universal service does not mean public services. Universal service means that certain service because they are of vital necessity for people, must be regulated. And I take a certain number of examples. As regard the problem of the fight against disinformation and fake news, it is quite clear that we have example now with the proposal of the EU regulation. It is quite clear that we need to regulate the platform, social network platform. It is quite clear that as regard the problem of the protection of intellectual property, we need to have very clear rules in order to forbid that certain private companies would be advantageous. The ranking of the web service are already regulated by regulation within Europe. The last point was about education. I think that's quite obvious that we need an education on a critical analysis of what exists on our digital media. It is absolutely needed, but we need that. Not only a course, a separate course on that, but also to introduce this critical analysis in certain specific areas. For instance, it's quite clear that we need that as regard the history. It's obvious that we need that, and that we need that as regard, for instance, all the journalistic, all the journalistic news. We need to have a critical analysis of what happens on the website. So that's the three questions. Thanks a lot for this question, and it is quite clear that I enjoy going forth with this discussion.
Thank you, Dr. Boulay. It is interesting to hear you talk on these matters because you also serve, as you've mentioned, as the chairperson on the Working Committee of Information Ethics. So your voice is very loud and should be very loud in this regard. I trust that you are also informed on the work that is being done by the French advocate Dan Shefford on these matters, and he's also well known in our circles as we are joining together in this specific platform. Your mentioning of the multidisciplinary aspects were very interesting, because it links up to this thing that in some communities, COVID is a religious thing. It was sent by God for whatever reason.
Mm-hmm.
In other communities, it's a political thing. People use it to fight the next election or each other. In other communities, it's an educational thing, or it's a communication thing, or a media thing. And the challenge that we will have is to bring it together in a multidisciplinary profile, so that everybody can link up to it. Everybody must understand it. Dr. Malik also mentioned that in some of the areas, they give their own definitions. And while it's very dangerous, it's very practical, so that people can understand this is not only a medical term, it means something for you and your personal behavior, and bang, we're back with information ethics. Thank you very much. I really enjoyed, and we look forward working with you on the complexity between information ethics and ethics of artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
But that will come later on. We are very honored to have you as one of the speakers. Dr. Malik, I must compliment you because the number of participants went up when you were talking. So thank you very much for your own contribution. Can you please attend to the questions that were raised?
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Bester. Yeah, I could see three questions. And the first one was about community TV. They were saying, is community radio the only media or alternative media that is contributing in the fight against COVID-19? Or is there community TV also? So I'll respond to that by saying that any of these alternative media, so it's not just, my presentation was about community radio, but anything which engages with the community directly and also makes them participate, and does things from their perspective and keeps their need in mind, can do the work that community radio is doing. However, I'm looking at community radio also because as a technology, we say community radio reaches to the very end of the development road. It reaches places which do not even have electricity. So given the simplicity of the technology and the ease of reception, community radio has been playing a major role, in fighting in fighting COVID-19. There are examples also of a lot of community newspapers which are contributing again to fighting of against COVID-19 and are playing similar roles in contributing to development. Also, the information in all these community media is localized, created through community participation. Their orientation is not for profit, and they are usually community owned. I do not look at them as a panacea for all kinds of issues, but the one thing that they do is democratize communication, and that goes a long way in solving many of the issues that we are discussing here. Okay, the second thing that the second question that came up was about whether this is happening only in rural areas, or is community radio active also in the cities? Yes, wherever you have community radio, they have been playing an active role in spite of a whole lot of challenges that they have been facing. Challenges related to funding, challenges relating to the fact that the reporters cannot come to the community radio station. Just to give one example, there is a radio station in the IT city, right in the middle of the IT city, called Gurgaon, or now it is called Gurugram, very close to Delhi. There, the radio stations have been working with the issues of migrant labor. And we all know, we had a presentation about how the difficult times that migrant laborers have been facing during this period. Now, they have been tackling their issues. There are migrant laborers who are, 6 or 7 of them they're staying in a small room, and then they ask you to practice social distancing. Now, there is nobody to cater to their issues, but they are tuning into radio. They are connecting to the radio through phone, and a lot of information which they can use is being provided to them. Then the third question which came up was about, it was a very straight question. I thought some of it got answered in the presentation. The question was about community. How has community radio contributed to fighting COVID-19? So, or the kind of programming that it has been doing. I mentioned a few things in the presentation, but just to add to that, they have been connecting to the COVID patients and sharing their experiences with the rest of the community. They've been doing school on radio. They've been doing psychological counseling. The information has been localized, and people can phone in to get their doubts clarified. So all of this, which is basically ways of connecting to the community, has been, happening at with community radios. I also understand, I just saw this in the, pop-up window here. Somebody has put a question related to disconnected communities. I completely understand what that is hinting at. Not all communities are harmonious. What we are looking at here is to look at cater to the most vulnerable, where who do not have access to information, and and where so people who already have ways of finding things out, and have the power also to be able to live their life normally, or resources to live their lives normally during the pandemic. Those are not that we are talking about. Even within the community, it is the vulnerable people that one is targeting, who need this kind of support. So in the end, I'll just bring it all together by saying that sectors like community radio have contributed and proven that they are useful, but still need the kind of recognition that they deserve from the government. This should be included in our recommendations so that the sector is strengthened. Thank you so much.
Dr. Malik, thank you very, very much. We value your contribution because it goes down to grassroots level. Your research and your contribution brings that local information back onto the table. You will remember we spoke yesterday about the global information that must go local, but also the local information that must go global, so that we can learn from each other. The Ebola some time ago in West Africa was a very good example. If we heard the local community sooner, the damage would have been much smaller. And therefore, the two-way communication that you brought to the table is very important. Thank you very much for that. Prof. Rao, I'm going to give you back the chair now.
Yeah.
And with two remarks. The one is, may we please not allow the police or the media or the politicians or the medics to alone in their own insight manage crises. It must be interdisciplinary. And secondly, I would like you to request our IFAP chair, Dorothy Gordon, to coordinate what came out in this session with her structures at the ITU, as well as the World Health Organization, as well as inside UNESCO, to bring forward the way in which we're going to communicate with each other during future crises. I thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Kuze. You have once again proved that you are not only a great speaker, but also a wonderful chairperson. Thank you. I also thank all the speakers for their very thoughtful and comprehensive presentations. Thank you very much. And now we will have again 5 minutes break. So after the break, we will reassemble and have a very quick valedictory session. So I request all the participants to bear with us and participate actively in the valediction also. Thank you. We will reassemble after 5 minutes. Karthik,
Yes, sir.
you are back. Sorry. Just a second.
Yes, sir. Shall we start?
Yeah. So we have come to the final session of this 3-day conference, the valedictory session. We will start the valedictory session with the report on the conference by Rachel. Rachel, may I request you to present the report on the conference?
Fantastic. Yes. Thank you so much for the organizers and all the participants, our hosts in Hyderabad, as well as UNESCO IFAB for supporting this event. It is quite an auspicious occasion to be able to report on the past 3 days. The official report is already about 11 pages. We have the Hyderabad Declaration, and of course, all the chats that have taken place up until now that has been collected, compiled, and worked through. So a quick overview. On day 1, we had 112 participants, and we also had the opening and welcoming session with our presenters from Russia, India, Brazil, and South Africa. The first session on multilingualism had the following themes of the promotion of multilingualism, the prioritization of ethical considerations in language policies. We addressed and emphasized the need to introduce more languages in school and even earlier in order to make use of brain plasticity in learning languages. It has been demonstrated that the acquisition of more languages improves the functioning of the brain. We need to promote the basic ideas and political and practical approaches towards supporting, preserving, and revitalizing indigenous and minority languages that have been formulated in final documents of previous UNESCO IFAB conferences. It has been emphasized that we promote the notion of multilingualism. We do not encourage some languages at the expense of other larger languages, but rather seek to promote multiple languages. A provocative recommendation was made by Gilwan to include another goal within the SDG framework. SDG 18 is recommended to be the access to and production of socially relevant knowledge in all languages. Ethics came up as well, and it was argued that ethics must be central in the consideration of the role and the value of languages. The second session on information preservation had themes of the lack of trust in government, the implications of archiving and digitalization on future generations, as well as the retention of knowledge. It was argued that citizens must be brought on board in order to engage with MIL together with government. Ethics and MIL are important because it opens up the space for information for all. Our lives are increasingly dependent on internet technologies, and during a crisis, this dependence becomes critical. We leave fewer traces on actual physical paper and other physical media as opposed to the digital traces that we leave online. And most of our data exchange takes place on cloud storage over which we have no control. We therefore need to take note of the ethical considerations in gathering and documenting information from disconnected communities. The pandemic is crucial and this information should be archived. Luckily, everything is digitalized nowadays, but not everything online is quality controlled. One might even then encounter disinformation as well as malinformation, as has been argued. It is concluded that uncertainty whether a digital medium is a sustainable archive going into the future. Rafael Kapuru made a very good vision or image when he said, consider how stone artifacts of 1,000 years ago are still existing today. What are the chances then of our digital archives still surviving 1,000 years into the future? He argued that there are semantic and pragmatic questions related to time, especially in regard to long-term archiving. Raphael referred to Jacques Derrida, that stating that archiving is the fight and the struggle against death, against entropy. So these questions still relate to the information ethical considerations of these discussions. On day 2, we had 84 participants, and our first session was on information for development. The themes that arose from this session was COVID light versus COVID version 3.0, and how we can utilize the lessons learned now for future pandemics and infodemics. Digital resilience was argued for, as well as the promotion of critical thinking, together with science and technology and information literacy education from school level. We must build truth and we must build trust within times of crisis. In consideration of our various and unique cultural backgrounds, compounded by the realities of COVID-19, the levels of trust, mistrust in government and GAFA, perhaps it is time to insist on a global, general set of international guidelines with an integrated set of cultural facets for the management of information in these times of crisis. It's argued to compile a universal framework for monitoring increased access to information in these times, as well as the incorporation of all SDGs within this framework. It's also been argued that we should collaborate with African and other governments, UNESCO, IFAB, towards designing similar but practical frameworks for development within lesser development countries, as well as SIDS, small island development states. The COVID-19 pandemic has demonstrated that resilience in health matters is fragile, especially in a globalized world, but especially in the context of geopolitical rivalry between these great powers. The coronavirus pandemic has turned into a geopolitical issue, and as a result, a new hierarchy of world power may emerge because of this crisis. Ethical considerations essentially would encompass credibility, reliability, and authorized access. A quote was highlighted in the session by Susanna. It seems that Jean Baudrillard was quite right at that time when he said, "We live in a world where there is more and more information and less meaning." Points were made about e-inclusion gaps and issues in digital resilience. We need to investigate how digital resources are used, not only whether there is access to it. The digital divide is not only an access issue, but also an information literacy one. There seems to be emerging consensus amongst all the participants of this conference. Inequity in technological access has led to lesser access to developmental information, causing more underdevelopment, particularly among the already marginalized and vulnerable sectors of society. It was concluded yesterday that it is time for civil society to get into alliance with governments to resist the influence of technological giants in the knowledge society. There must be equilibrium in government's role in guaranteeing freedom of expression while regulating quality of information and the role of private sector and private sector's social responsibility. The fourth session on information literacy had the following themes: adoption of a national MOL policy framework, MOL teacher training, and integration of MOL from early childhood onwards for lifelong learning, as well as multidisciplinary collaboration across a number of sectors. We need to realize that COVID-19 made old issues and problems which have already existed quite obvious. But these issues weren't before given priority attention. Examples include digital divide, the technological divide, and consistent threats to our freedom of access to information and freedom of expression. We need to consider the power of technological companies and giants, perception of low-level science and health literacy, and science and technology not being given adequate acknowledgement from mass media companies. It is therefore crucial to prioritize the media and information literacy of teachers and integrate this within education from a very early level onwards. The fight against COVID-19 must be a multidisciplinary effort. More indigenous languages should play a role in unpacking this pandemic. More media and statistical literacy skills should be cultivated to enable citizen empowerment considering this infodemic. A policy stance that is supportive of establishment of community radio stations as a life-saving element during the pandemic and beyond, with programming quotas from national broadcasters. On day 3, today, we had 75 participants. We're still monitoring. Sometimes it goes up and other times it goes down. Themes that have arisen within this information accessibility theme that we started with this morning is the information lockdown, access to accurate and quality health information, transparency by health service providers and governments, and the acknowledgement that human dignity is paramount. There is a dilemma facing COVID-19 related information preservation efforts throughout the world. It is hard to make any government, state, and media monopolies to be transparent and accountable. It is therefore imperative to establish universal standards. A statement was made, which is quite interesting. When information access to information is in crisis. So for example, what do patients do if they have to visit the ICU, but they're not sure which hospital is available for them to go to, and what information is available that is of value to them in this particular crisis? We need a whole new set of skills and tools in order to maneuver in this new pandemic information landscape. Facing this situation, we must prioritize human dignity as a core principle, and 4 issues have arisen: human life, access to health information, human dignity, and justice, good governance, and transparency. A huge challenge therefore arises because we find that even educated individuals choose to share false information because it is aligned with their beliefs. We have to acknowledge that biases and prejudices do exist. In order to empower and educate society, we can attempt by combining different disciplines to make the strategy more robust to empower and educate people, working on different formats across different platforms. But we do realize that this is not a simple short-term solution, and instead it must be a global effort. As Tayane indicated, we are a part of society, not apart from society. Inclusion is paramount. Data centralization and data circulation will be central to the discussion of what and where we pick what to preserve about COVID-19, given all the global challenges associated with COVID-19 data and information. And our final session on information ethics, we had themes arising on the scale of information crises, once again, the critical thinking skills, which can be lacking, interdisciplinary and multi-stakeholder collaborative efforts, and the role of community radios and other alternative media platforms. In physical terms, a crisis event is then the presence of a threat to values. It's a period of uncertainty, and it also entails issues of constraints. As Craig has argued, a physical crisis always has an accompanying crisis of information. One sees a threat to values such as human health and life and dignity, economic well-being, and freedom of movement. And therefore, it's once again argued that an international advisory body with public good and public interest must be established and motivated. This must be supported by an active endeavor towards improving critical thinking skills. If the pandemic lasts for a longer time, there will be longer term consequences, as well as massive public backlashes against lockdowns. I'm sure you all saw the discussion happening on the side with Craig and Pierre-Emmanuel on this in the public backlashes and the geopolitical considerations. However, as was argued by Greg, context must be supplied in order to address this ecosystem in fear. We need to consider the collective challenges our digital societies are facing. To address this, we must set up interdisciplinary, multi-stakeholder transparent national and international data ethics agencies as a point of necessity. Information ethics, can be argued, is the missing element in education reform initiatives worldwide and must be embedded in as many courses across disciplines. And finally, we should not underestimate the role of community radios and other alternative media platforms, such as television and newspapers. It helps us to reach the unreachable by creative blending and integrating of ICTs with community media. And this will help us to address digital divide and include vulnerable communities in the infosphere. It is essential to build collective fact-checking capacities of local communities in order to counter misinformation. Information ethics, then, is concerned with how people can better their lives and to become an inclusive and equitable society. By applying an information ethical perspective, this can hopefully assist us towards bridging the digital divide. I think, as can be seen in this throughout these past 3 days, we have addressed all 6 IFAP priority areas. And hopefully together with this, not only do we contribute to solutions to the pandemic and the infodemic, but maybe we can also argue for world peace. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. I think everybody agrees with me that it is not so easy to put 22 papers together and summarize them and make a presentation in 10 minutes. Because, as you know, each paper took, the time was allotted 15 minutes. We know that each speaker can speak even 30 minutes. So such papers putting together within and summarizing them and making very interesting presentation within 10 minutes is not an easy job. It requires special skills. So thank you very much, Rachel, for your very interesting summarization and presentation. Now I request Echo from UNESCO Paris to share his, to give valedictory address in this conference.
Thank you very much, Professor Rao. It's a big pleasure to be part of this very important conference of 3 days. Permit me to thank the organizers for the rich content that was displayed and that permitted us to see the pertinence of IFAP priorities, not only in addressing issues related to information for development, but the intersection of many of the priority areas, if it's media information literacy, if it's information accessibility, or even information ethics. I would thus like to thank specifically the University of Hyderabad and the UNESCO office in New Delhi, I think, for organizing this event, the IFAP chair and the different working group chairs that participated very actively in this conference. We would like to thank all of you for your input and for your contributions. Universal access to information is a building block of knowledge societies, and it's at the core of the mandate of IFAP. And the COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted the importance of information in health crisis. All the presentations that we've heard highlighted this linkage of information that can save lives and that can change the way that we react vis-a-vis a pandemic such as the COVID-19 one. Access to accurate and timely information helps people to make safe choices for themselves, for their families. And governments have an obligation to disseminate widely public interest information to combat disinformation. I found the discussions around disinformation, misinformation, and the infodemic quite interesting during this conference. But access to information also promotes accountability regarding the highly impactful decisions governments make during the emergencies. I think this was also evident in many of the discussions and the interventions. So while the pandemic has disrupted many of the ways that we do things, it has also disrupted the way that we relate to information and how information is being made available. And I think much is to be done in order to look a little bit deeper into this phenomena and what can be done in order to fully harness the potential of information during a crisis period such as the COVID-19 pandemic. The discussions during this online conference of the 3 days will make important contributions to the overall celebration of the International Day of Universal Access to Information. As you know, the theme of this year is access to information, saving lives, building trust, bringing hope. And we are exactly 1 month from the celebration of this day, and I think it's very relevant that we come with the very rich input from IFAP in the discussions that will be taken further during the celebrations on the 28th of September. I hope that IFAP can take further the very concrete recommendations that were made and that it can assist member states in taking into account information for development, information literacy, information preservation, information ethics, information accessibility, and multilingualism when formulating proactive information disclosure strategies and policies. IFAP can play an important role to understand and make available digital systems for processing information requests. How can we take this endeavor further? Let us take these discussions further, and I invite all of you to also participate in the high-level event that will take place on the 28th of September and the thematic discussions that would follow from the 28th to the 30th of September. Let us continue to advocate for public access to information, especially during crises. It serves public health and economic goals and should, as a result, be seen as part of the response and not as an external burden which undermines the ability to respond to crises. Thank you very much and congratulations to the organizers.
Thank you, Eko. Thank you very much. We are also thankful to UNESCO for its moral support that has been given in successful conduct of this conference. Not only UNESCO Paris, UNESCO India. So once again, we thank the UNESCO for its support. Thank you. Now we will go to the last item of the valediction. That is, we are introducing now the Hyderabad Declaration. You see, in India, especially, the concept of declaration in academic conferences is very new. It may be a routine thing in European conferences in other parts of the world, but it's a very new concept in India. Maybe this is for the first time we are introducing in academic conference an item called Hyderabad Declaration. So shall I, Karthik, can you display the declaration, Hyderabad Declaration? Yeah. Yeah. This is the Hyderabad Declaration that we are introducing for your in-principle approval. I agree that this is a very, very comprehensive and a very broad declaration, which needs to be edited and added by taking the inputs from participants as well as the speakers of this conference. And this declaration will go as a declaration of the conference. It is not the declaration of one organization or two organizations. It is the declaration of the conference. And that's why I request all the participants and also speakers. Some of the speakers have already sent their inputs. Thanks. And some of the participants also have given their inputs. So now this is actually we are displaying this declaration for your in principle approval. And this declaration includes the recommendations made by all speakers, number one, and number two. And this declaration also have a brief summarization of each and every IFAP priority area under which we are giving the recommendations of from the paper presenters. But these declarations we will submit it to the UNESCO. ECHO is here, so we will submit it to the UNESCO, and we will also place in the social media so that it will get wide publicity. And so I request all of you to approve the declaration. Is it okay? Okay. Is it okay? Karthik, please display the declaration. Please, Karthik, display the declaration. Yeah. Yes.
Prof. Rao?
Yes.
This is Kutsia Bester. I read through the document, and I'm very satisfied with the wording, and I looked at it from two perspectives. The one is that we must not say things that can, in some countries, contribute to I don't want to use the word unrest, but to make people uncomfortable. I think the wording is a very worthy wording with a very neat capturing of very difficult and complicated matters. That is my first remark. My second remark is I thank you for accommodating the idea that the Hyderabad Declaration must not be independent from many other declarations in this regard. So the bigger picture of the Hyderabad Declaration must also be part of what we want to put out there for people to take note of. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with you. Even when we have developed the concept note and also Hyderabad Declaration, we always mention that this conference is in continuation to the conferences in Hantimanchis, Ipost, Sakhalin, and then in Cape Town, Rio. So this is a continuous effort to highlight the IFAP priority areas, to disseminate information about priority areas in all countries. So this declaration is not, in that sense, this declaration is not individual, neither individual nor independent. This is a continuation of the efforts. Tomorrow again, hopefully we may have another conference next year. So again, maybe somewhere in the world. So again, that conference will be continuation of again Hyderabad, Hantimanchis, then Cape Town, etc. So this is a continuous effort by all of us. It is a teamwork. It is not a work of any individual or any individual institute. It is a teamwork of all of us, IFAP community, let us say across the globe, to promote, highlight, disseminate IFAP priority areas. Okay. Can you hear me? Okay. Yeah.
Rao.
Yeah.
Can I say?
Yeah, please, sir.
So I am so happy to look at your very satisfied face. Happiness is drawn on your cheeks, and on your eyes. I'm very happy that I managed to convince you to do all these efforts, with your team. with partners from South Africa to organize this excellent conference. I hear only excellent, feedback and responses from everybody that the conference is a very, very, very significant success of your team, your team as principal organizers. Second, I am very satisfied of the continuity of the chain of the conferences that were made within IFAP framework. And if we start to listen to list all the conferences, please don't forget, an excellent conference that was organized by our colleagues in Israel. And they are not to blame that Israel government, withdraw from UNESCO, but the conference was excellent. The third one, very tiny, remark. It is. I'm addressing Rachel. Rachel, information for all program in IFAP Russia is too colloquial. There are two exact names of organizations that participated in organization: Russian National IFAP Committee and its working body Interregional Library Cooperation Center. Please replace this, mention. Okay. And then I would like to express my eternal, delight, and admiration on your abilities, to sum up and generalize, the content you heard, or you even anticipate, your anticipation of what people will say, coincides with what they said. So, and one more observation, that all faces that I see on my screen are the same faces that were in Khanty-Mansiysk last year, except of Greg Simmons, who disappeared, in the last moment. I enjoyed the conference, the content, the whole presentations very much. And Pierre Emmanuel, I saw your correspondence with Greg Simmons about what happens in Belarus. If you send me your phone numbers, and if you are using, WhatsApp, I will be sending you the most, profound, Russian comments on what happens in brother country now in Russian, and you will be translating this in English through Google Translator, Yandex Translator, Chinese translation machines,
Okay, thank you, Professor Kuzmin, for your comments. Anybody would like to add? Karthik, please help me to identify, because I don't see all on the screen, on my screen. Anybody would like to speak? Karthik?
Sir.
You please help me in identifying people who would like to speak, because I don't see all of them on my screen.
Yes, those who would like to speak to Professor Rao.
Speakers, from the speakers, from the speakers.
Yeah. Please raise your hand.
From the speakers.
Yes. No, sir, I can't see.
Huh?
I can't see anybody raising the hand.
What? Anybody would like to add, please? Your final impression on the conference. You can also give suggestions for the improvement.
Rao, what can we add, What can we add, else? Maybe you will send us, the final version of the Hyderabad Declaration, and we will see it. Maybe we will, inscribe some minor corrections
Yeah, definitely. Sure, sure. What we will do is we will incorporate all the sessions made by the participants and the speakers, and we will edit it, whatever we know, so, and share among the partners. And now the draft of the declaration is available in the conference link. So I request all the participants to go through it and give their sessions. When we get sessions from all the participants and the speakers, we will incorporate those sessions and again share in the conference link, as well as we will send the same to the speakers and the partners. So then only finally we will make a final document. It will be done. And also, let me also mention, taking this opportunity, let me also mention that we are going to bring out the proceedings of the conference in digital form. So most of you have already sent your papers, and I think we have almost all papers now with us. Those who did not send, they can now incorporate their the discussion, and if they want to modify the paper, they can modify. Those who have already sent the paper can also, if they want to modify the paper, considering the discussion and the sessions made during the presentation, and send it by 10th September. Please send your paper by 10th September, because we want to bring the proceedings of the conference and final version of the Hyderabad declaration, final report. I think report is almost final. Okay, maybe Rachel would like to add something or edit little something. Okay, all these documents, 3 documents, report, proceedings, Hyderabad declaration, we will bring by 20th September. And we will send, we will send these documents to UNESCO also officially. Is it okay, Echo? Echo, is it okay if we will send it by 20th September?
Yes, I think, yes, thank you very much, Dr. Rao. I think it's important to incorporate the input of all the participants now that they've seen the draft, and to finalize it and to spend a little bit of time and to provide the final version before the 28th, which is the celebration. Thank you.
Yeah, but we will share the final document by 20th, 20 September. Is it okay? So if it is okay to everyone, let me say a few words. Thanks. First of all, I would like to thank all the partners for giving their support in successful conduct of this conference. And it really showed the result and effectiveness of the teamwork. This is a teamwork. So we all worked, all the partners, UNESCO, we all worked as a team. And only because of that work, we can say that, if everybody agrees with me, that we had a successful conference, both in terms of content and also organization. So thank you very much, partners. And I think whatever the conference in future we will do as a team. I think that would help us to understand better, and also it will enrich the content of the conference. Once it is a teamwork, it will really enrich the content of the conference. We can really contribute to the IFAP program. I also thank all the participants. We have almost 100 participants on the first day, second day, again 70, now also 60, 70 participants for their patient hearing and actively participating through chat box, because we cannot have a direct conversation with the speakers, because the number of the participants are too many. So time is not sufficient. So that's why we have asked you to post your comments or questions in the chat box. I thank the participants, and also I thank the university administration, which has supported us well, and let us also thank the office of the office of our center, which has in the back of this is the screen and supporting us. What?
Who is speaking?
Someone is speaking. Okay, so I thank the office for its supporting us with all giving us technical support, and if I miss anyone, it is not intentional. So I once again thank each and everyone for your contribution to this conference. It's a great event, and we thank. If we have to say individually also, we thank Kuzmin, Dorothy, Yako, Professor Prasad, and then of course Rachel, Kudze, and also all the speakers who came forward when we asked to make presentations, despite because nowadays the online conferences are too many. Okay, so I understand that it is very difficult to write a meaningful paper within given short period of time, and also may submit PPTs as well as paper. So really it is great. I thank again, once again, all the speakers, participants, partners, each and everyone for their support and in successful conduct of this conference. Sorry, I cannot invite you for any gala dinner now. Okay, so instead what I suggest you is that have a have a glass of wine during your dinner or lunch because each one has contributed to this conference. This is not a contribution of one institution, one person. Each one of us have contributed to this conference. So have a glass of wine with satisfaction. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.